Welcome. Oh, shoot. There you are. Ladies and gentlemen, Andrew D. Basiago. Andy?
Yes, Aaron. The music dropped off, so I did not realize it was my mark to hit. So
sorry about that.
Good to be with you again.
Good to be with you too. Now I hope everything goes well, because yesterday my other computer I usually use died on me. So this is a backup computer. So that might be why you didn't hear it. So I apologize for that.
Well, Aaron, we're living in days of miracles and wonders, but we're also living at a time in which internet-itis and computer-itis are afflicting everybody now. We have had nothing but one problem after another with our digital platform on both iPhones and cell phones. So it'd be interesting to take some reports today from what other people are experiencing, but it's becoming all too common. So I think we really have to take a look at what is subverting the quality and constancy of our digital platforms.
Yes. Yes. That is very, very good question. And tonight's show is the question and answer show. So, and if you want to ask a question, type it into the chat and make sure it's about Andy's experiences and people he has,
or views of truth, or true history that I've shared, not just with my experiences, but just like on last week's show about Andy time travel in the Bible code, where I was talking about different aspects of why we know that the Bible code is a real phenomenon. It's not an urban legend. It's not conjecture. It is appearing with an utterly improbable probability and is a real phenomenon. So really any question that goes to what I've discussed.
Okay. Cheryl did, she actually sent in a Cash App donation. So thank you to TruthQuest. So thank you, Cheryl. And her question is two questions, actually. Was wondering, when was the last time Andy time traveled? Does he plan on doing it again? That's the first question.
All right, let's take it one at a time. I have kind of concluded that my trips to what they believed or they thought might be Mars in Project Mars, 1981 to 84, when I was in it, was actually a form of interdimensional travel via a quantum access device, not necessarily travel in real time from here to Mars, just using a teleport device of some kind of teleporter. There's more and more evidence that's being compiled that one of the major roles we were performing in that project was to enable, for example, the Army to determine whether we were going to the actual Mars that we see in the night sky, or a planet or planetoid that had Mars-like characteristics, and they were using us as explorers and, going through extensive questioning when we were being debriefed for an hour or two after we came back each time. Okay, what did you see next? And then what happened? Then what did you see next? And then what did you see? They were trying to determine whether we were going to the Mars that we see in the night sky or some other dimensional location where there was a Mars-like planet. So I would say in answer to that question that the last time I time traveled was not in DARPA's Project Pegasus, but in the Defense Department's what we're calling Project Mars. And because it didn't have a name, it was just the program.
Wow.
And that last trip was in August of 1984. Would I go again? No. Been there, done that. Even if Tesla teleportation was introduced in real time and shown on the Today Show, I wouldn't even jump through a teleporter just to go through one side of a device and pop out on the other side of their studio stage, because I've done that. I don't want to do that. There's evidence that I had both damage to both my visual and my renal cortex from all of the new dangerous experimental technologies that I was exposed to between 1968 and 72 and 1980 and 84. So no, I would never time travel again. Although all of us may be, if we're successful in introducing Tesla teleportation. But then when civilians like you and I would be invited to go publicly, it would not be dangerous at that point when they fully worked out all the bugs that they can work out. But, I've often said that I would not necessarily support global public teleportation if it cannot be made safe, because there were medical side effects to those of us who were, for example, teleporting in childhood. They all developed in adulthood a disease that mimics diabetes, and the adults who went were all developing heart valve defects, including my late father, who had to have a St. Jude's cuff placed to make his mitral valve flap correctly and preserve his life through proper heart function, heart health. But at the same time, I've qualified that concern about, let's say, introducing teleportation if it causes illness. Because, Aaron, we are losing to having as many Americans experience losing their lives or experiencing grievous bodily harm as occurred during 13 years of the Vietnam War. We're having the same number of deaths and, medical casualties every year in America as we had from the 13 years of the Vietnam War. About 50,000 deaths and 300,000 cases of grievous bodily injury. So I've qualified my concern about the possible medical side effects with, for example, Tesla teleportation as our primary transit modality by saying, look, even if we lose some people or have some people injured through teleportation, that may still be safer than automobile transit. It's very dangerous. As Ralph Nader said, unsafe at any speed. So, no, I personally, though, do not want to pioneer time travel or experiencing it anymore in this lifetime, at least.
Okay. We had someone pop up in the chat. It's Kathy Ashby. She says, I attended Andrew Basiago's lecture at the 2016 Consciousness Expo in Orlando. It was great listening to his experiences as a child and up to now. Mm-hmm. So welcome to the program, Kathy, and everybody else, all the mods and everybody's.
Yes, I enjoyed that conference. I met Dr. Joel Wallach there and attended his lecture. It was very brilliant and entertaining. He's got a great sense of humor. I met Nick Begich Jr. there and attended his lecture, talking about all of his mind control research that he did with a grant from Dorothy Lay of the late potato chip fortune.
Wow.
And a couple of other very brilliant speakers. Interestingly, the New Jersey born or based sponsors of that new Consciousness Expo in Orlando, Florida in August of 2017 were from my township in New Jersey where I was doing all the time traveling from. And they found me a reference to a scholarship that had been started in the name of the local health teacher and former Army nurse, Stephanie Bindus.
Wow.
And as you may recall, Stephanie Bindus was the woman who interviewed me after they had spun me to induce out-of-body experience.
Yeah.
And I had confronted that kind of black infrastructure, almost like it was almost like a black railway bridge, mm-hmm. And I couldn't get past it. And that's what Mrs. Bindus said. Yes, others are reporting that. We think it's the infrastructure propagating the hologram in which we find ourselves. We're calling it the Matrix.
Wow.
So at that August 2017 conference in Orlando, Florida, as far east as I got in my speaking career, at least publicly, I met some people from my old township in New Jersey, and they knew of a scholarship fund that had been started in the name of Stephanie Bindus, one of the team leaders on Project Pegasus.
Wow. That's amazing. And the second question she had was, are others still time traveling? Well,
I would say almost certainly. I mean, I was supposed to go on to the U.S. Naval Academy and then become a U.S. naval officer who would be time traveling in adulthood. And instead, they put me in the Mars program and used me to determine whether the place we were going to was really Mars, one we see in the sky, or a form of interdimensional travel. And I did not go into the Navy, but I was used. There were many naval people in Project Mars, from H. Ross Perot Sr. to Admiral Stansfield Turner, President Carter's CIA director, to William Cameron McCool, somebody 5 years younger than me, born September 23rd of 1961. I on September 18th of 1961, who sadly lost his life on the Space Shuttle Columbia on February 1st of 2003. But Willie McCool, who told us when he introduced himself to the class that all we had to remember was that he was cool, and to remember that his name was McCool. But he was at a plebe at the U.S. Naval Academy in Annapolis when we were being trained at College of the Siskiyous in summer of 1980. That was supposed to be my destiny, but I stood up my local congressman, Barry Goldwater Jr. of Woodland Hills, California, when I was like a high school sophomore or junior, and I never went Navy, but I certainly am proud of the U.S. Navy, and I don't even think Americans know what the Navy Department has been doing for them while they've been sleeping safely in their beds at night. I did some of those things for the Navy. So I was actually activated in the Naval Secret Service in the 1980s. I had a false credential under lieutenant commander status, under an alias with my picture, nonetheless, having been taken at the Naval Station in Long Beach, California. And then my birth name, Andrew Basiago, without my middle name, Andrew Daniel Basiago, was listed over with the Naval Investigative Service in Upland, California. And I checked those records in the year 2000, going back 16 years to when I was no longer going to off-planet in Project Mars. And the base commander there at the NIS in Upland, he was mad at me for just stopping by his office, right? And he said, listen, let me photograph your California driver's license. Now go home to Chatsworth, California, where you tell me you're from. And about 3 o'clock this afternoon, I'll call you and tell you if you're in our records. And he did. And I was. So after 16 years, the NIS, which will later become the NCIS, the Naval Criminal Investigative Service, I had just served in it when it was the Naval Investigative Service, confirmed that I was in their records. But when I went to some of the finest trial lawyers in America, they said, Andy, it doesn't matter. I said, why? You are not going to win in federal court, in either open court or in a FISA court under the Federal Intelligence Services Act or whatever it is, or Secrecy Act. And I said, why not? And they said, because the U.S. judiciary is cooperating with the executive branch, namely the president, and the military, to render all claims of such government service as either frivolous or failure to state a claim under Federal Rules of Civil Procedure, B1 or B12.6 or B612. they would have said is that such a claim of time traveling, such a claim of going off planet in the secret space program, using different transportation modalities, will be rendered frivolous or failure to state a claim under 12b1 or 12b6. And there you have it. So is there justice in America? No, not for those who have served the country in a special way, like myself. That's one of the chief reasons I ran for president as an independent write-in candidate in 2016, getting about 25,000 votes in about half of our states. I didn't get qualified in the other half of the United States. For example, in Arizona, because the organizer there did not send me the endorsee signatures quickly enough, and we ran the deadline. But I was a legitimate candidate. I was not lying when I declared on Coast to Coast AM with George Norrie on December 19th of 2015 and said, George, or actually it was Jimmy Church was the host that night. I said, Jimmy, I am declaring my candidacy for President of the United States. And then I said, how cool is that? And what did they know? They knew that I was a candidate who could reach the millennials. Just like when I was campaigning in southern states, I was describing what a Kenny Chesney fan I am. Not because I love country and western, because I think Kenny Chesney is a very gifted songwriter and musician. I heard him playing his guitar recently in Agoura, California, when he was filming an MTV video, and Kenny Chesney knows how to play, just like Glenn Campbell did, and the guitar.
Yeah.
I mean, really well. And I was right. But what I was doing, quite honestly, was sharing my favorite country and western stars like Johnny Cash and Kenny Chesney and so forth to appeal to the southern electorate, where country and western is as, as southern as hush puppies and grits, okay, and gumbo, soup. And they knew that, wait a minute, this guy can appeal to the millennials, he can appeal to the South, he can appeal to intellectuals, he can appeal to the 30 to 40 million Americans who are cultural creatives. He's been all over the radio and the alternative media. And that is when they decided to blind me to prevent me from becoming U.S. president. I do not believe that's going to succeed, but at the same time, I will never run again unless asked to run as, let's say, somebody's vice presidential running mate.
Okay.
I may run for the U.S. Senate, but I haven't yet decided on that. But I'm not going to be pursuing the presidency because I was attacked when I first ran as somebody who had been telling the truth to the American people. They knocked out my vision, probably also my kidney function, and I have already paid the price. Those health maladies will be reversed because all of the cures are being suppressed. Everybody needs to know that it's not just a fashionable statement that the major HMOs and allopathic doctors in this country are in the disease maintenance industry, not the health maintenance industry, as the HMOs suggest.
Right.
But Aaron, they are. They are keeping back incredible advances in medical technology, and it has to end.
Yes.
And that's why I'm heralding now the bionic revolution. It is already upon us, and they are keeping it back.
Terrible.
So anyway, I kind of went long on that, but no, I will never time travel again. I will also never run for president again. Why? Because look, life is experience. I had those experiences, and now I'm having other experiences that I'm enjoying very much. So no, I'm not going to do those two things ever, certainly directly again.
Okay. Paul asks a question. He says, I'm hearing about some kind of event possibly happening regarding a super wave solar galactic event. I mean, did they tell you anything about that when you were in the programs?
Well, the only thing that comes close to that is that when my dad and I left the Dulce base in northern New Mexico on the Archuleta Mesa,
Mm-hmm.
I said, Dad, why did they build those 200 stories below ground of what from the elevator looked like floor after floor of empty shopping space? Like you were going through the Fox Hills Mall in California, but not, 2 or 3 stories, but 200. But they were all blank. There was nothing there. They were empty.
Wow.
And he said, there's going to be a big disaster someday. And I said, when? And he said, well, when long after I'm dead and gone. So my dad passed away in January 1990.
Mm-hmm.
So he never told me what it was. I think they may have obviated by preventing the Earth from being in the position where that solar flaring, those solar flares or flare in 2012, if there had been 5 to 6 more days, or like 1% or so, of rotation of the Earth, we would have had the melting of the polar ice caps and the loss of about 70% of the global population, because 70% of human beings on Earth live within a 1-hour car drive of an ocean. Similarly, on the East Coast, if that rock fell off of that famous escarpment there, I'm drawing a blank on the name of it. Remember what that was, Aaron?
No.
It's either I think it's in Spain or Portugal. It's like oh God, what was it called? It's something like the Capitan Mesa or something. I'd have to remember what it was. The La something. I'll have to do some research on that.
Okay. Sorry.
That could cause
La Palma.
2000s.
What? La Palma.
La Palma. That's right. Very good. I always blank on that name.
Thanks for your range.
I know a lot of Spanish, but I often forget those place names and stuff like that. La Palma. If the La Palma escarpment there plops into the Atlantic, it could cause a 2,000-foot tidal wave traveling at 600 miles per hour to hit the East Coast. If the East Antarctic ice shelf melts, the Empire State Building in New York City would be flooded up to the 180th floor. So they are making plans to relocate the American capital from Washington, D.C. to Denver, Colorado.
Right.
They have even put branches of the Attorney General, the State Department, and the EPA beneath the Denver International Airport.
Wow.
So it could be a number of things. It could be a global coastal flooding event that floods the coastal areas of our country and all the cities that are on the coast. It could be the collapsing of La Palma, rock into the Atlantic. It could be global cooling. It could be a solar flare.
Well,
it could be gradual global warming or a nuclear war that would cause a global coastal flooding event.
Yeah.
It could be, as Robert Felix believes, a global ice age. He's the ice age expert. I spoke with Robert, quite a brilliant researcher and a very nice man.
Mm-hmm.
We don't know. My dad never told me, but he did suggest that the Dulce base up at that Rio Arriba transit area sign in the ground there on the Archuleta Mesa was for a huge catastrophe that was going to occur at some time in the future. But do I know what that is? Absolutely not. If I did, I would have been telling it on radio. I would have been including some kind of creative proposal to deal with it in my 100 proposals when I ran for president. In 2016, I'd be talking about it today, but I was never told. I was never briefed on it. I do not know. And I do not know if it's even going to happen. Maybe the flooding of the East Coast that had left the U.S. Supreme Court building under 100 feet of brackish water when I did the first probe to the future via chronovision with a group of fellow children, Project Pegasus, which was the first group of humans on Earth who were going forward in time via a chronovisor probe. Maybe when we saw the Supreme Court building in D.C. under 100 feet of brackish water, that was the event that was supposed to happen in 2012. Because when we went back to the learning lab at Mount View Road School the next week, the next Monday, they said that they had sent us to Washington, D.C. in the year 2013. And that global coastal flooding event had happened, and the whole tidal basin there in Washington was flooded.
Maybe you misheard it. It was 2030, not 2013.
No, it was 2013 of that, I'm sure.
Okay. Well, that's interesting.
So I was looking for that in 2012, but nothing happened. And we did come so close to it that it looks like what they may have done with that probe was overshoot this dimension a tick or two, and we actually were involved in interdimensional travel, just like we were when we went to Mars 10 years later.
Interesting.
Or I went to Mars 10 years later, after 71.
Well,
so we don't know.
I know there are some people who are claiming that we've somehow switched where we are in the Milky Way, like by a long ways. Like we thought we were in this one particular arm, but now we're in a different arm and closer to the center.
Well, maybe the host of heaven, the Almighty, the Supreme Being who created everything, the heavens and the earth, right? Genesis, Genesis 1. Okay. Maybe God moved us, as I conjectured in the previous episode of The Quest for Truth, because the vast majority of human beings alive in this time and place, this epoch of civilization, on this planet, in this dimension, didn't deserve such a global coastal flooding event that would have killed 70% of them off and subjected the rest of them to conditions in which the living would have envied the dead. I believe that that's true. I believe that most people are good, although some people are growing worse and worse, as Scripture predicts. The ways of men shall grow worse and worse. So some are becoming more wicked, but there are still many good people living Christic lives.
Oh, yeah.
And so maybe, to the extent that the CIA confirmed for me that the Polaris constellation that you can literally walk out of your house and see at night, the North Star, is literally heaven. And that's where we go when we die, to review our last life and review the one we're going to be, relative to our past lives, and then review the one we're going to be going to, is literally, there's no dichotomy between that idea of heaven and the heavens in the night sky, because heaven is in the night sky. It's Polaris. Okay? So that's a major aspect of the truth that's been concealed. But since heaven is Polaris, maybe the host of heaven, namely the inhabitants of Polaris, including Almighty God and his saints and angels, moved us. Why couldn't they? All of the planetary and galactic areas around Polaris are potentially inhabited, so maybe they moved us around in the galaxy. Quite possible.
Could be. Wow. That's awesome. So now I think I might have let's see if there's any more questions over here, because I have a few questions of my own.
Well, fire away. Maybe you want to ask those and just see what accumulates from others.
Okay, hold on. Trying to find. Okay, here it is. Oh, that's not working. Uh-oh. Uh-oh, my computer seems to have frozen up. Oh,
Did we lose the show?
Yeah, this is the problem. This is my backup computer, which freezes up occasionally. This is the first time it's done it. Folks, if you can still hear me, I'm going to turn this off and turn it back on again, and we'll be right back. I apologize. I apologize, Andy. Okay, I'm going to turn.
Well, I didn't get the music at the start of the show.
Okay, we're back on the air, I think. We're back on the air. Hello, everybody. Sorry about that. It's this computer. It's my backup computer. We're back. Andy, I'm sorry about that. I'll see if
Not a problem. It's becoming more and more commonplace in the digital platforms by which the psychotronic age, the digital age, what do you want to call it, the time-space age is being affected. And, as I was just commenting when we went to break, that one of the tragedies of the modern world is that, people are imagining that there'll be some kind of dimensional shift where the good will go in one direction and the evil in another.
Mm-hmm.
But the problem is that the good are still being forced to live among the evil. And one of the things that the wicked are doing is using these amazing digital technologies to make our lives more regimented, more dysfunctional, more sort of under cybernetic control. And I learned recently from Randy Moggins, the broadcaster, that it was always intended that the internet be used to pipeline the dark web. The web was just kind of a stalking horse and a preparation to then pipeline the content from the dark web with all of the violence, the cruelty against men, women, and children, particularly children, the deviant sexuality, and all of the things that have been common on the web, but there's also been all that incredibly dark stuff. Both deviant sexuality and mayhem and violent crimes against people being done on the dark web. But it was always the intent to have that on the web. That's why they started pipelining some of that, like, let's say, the immolation death of that Jordanian pilot on the web. They didn't warn us. We even went something that said, warning, the following content is extremely disturbing.
Mm-hmm.
They just put stuff up there.
Wow.
And that was always the intent of the web. So
that's terrible.
Is the infrastructure, the oligarchy of evil in our world affecting the digital platforms, the digital realm that they've been creating since 1995? You betcha.
Wow.
We have to be awake and aware, my friends, and wake up to the abuse of normal human decency and kindness and wellness and regard for others that the television commercials, the television shows, the content of the web, and other aspects of the digital age are being used to shepherd in a different world. And it's not a better world.
Mm-hmm.
It's the world in which, as Scripture says, the ways of men shall grow worse and worse. They're being made worse.
Right.
I mean, there is a movement towards cannibalism as an inspired culinary choice.
Terrible.
In this country.
Terrible. The
LA Cannibal Club website is apparently checked out as real. And there was even a story about that trend in culinary arts in America in the New York Times. Now, I don't know about you, Aaron, but previously, all we'd ever heard of volitional cannibalism was the Donner Pass Party near Truckee, California, and the Andes survivors that my fellow Cambridge graduate, Piers Paul Read, wrote about in his famous bestseller, Alive, the story of the Andes survivors.
Mm-hmm.
But it was never an inspired dietary choice, eating the flesh of fellow humans.
Horrible.
But they are trying to normalize everything that they have been up to, and that is one of those incredibly atrocious practices.
That's just sickening, and not anything that should be going on. Now, I have up on screen your protecting the Sasquatch species initiative as part of your 100 proposals. That was an interesting one. Acknowledging.
Right. I did that because, look, and I also talked about in that proposal that I was the only U.S. presidential candidate since Theodore Roosevelt who even spoke about the Sasquatch. Now, why did I do that? Why did I call for protecting the Sasquatch, even though one of the 4 Sasquatch species is potentially violent and will even get down on 4 legs to run at you, as described by radio broadcaster Gary Anderson of Night Dreams Talk Radio with me a few months ago. Okay. What I was responding to was a Sasquatch scholar that I consulted with, Dr. Melba Ketchum. Melba Ketchum is a biologist who found, through studying genetic evidence of Sasquatch, that Sasquatch have the matrilineal DNA, or it's also called the mitochondrial DNA, of modern humans, and the patrilineal, or father's DNA, of an unknown primate. They don't even know what it was. Now, what does that mean? That means that all of the Sasquatch are related to our maternal lines, to our mothers. And I was making the point that being the case, even though they are different primates, they're primates related to us. So is it not genocide when we have TV shows, again, on that sort of demented, demonic television platform that the evil oligarchy is working through, called Killing Bigfoot? What's going to come after killing Bigfoot? Killing Irishmen? Killing Frenchmen? Killing Chinese? Killing Japanese? Killing Cubans? Killing Poles? Russians?
Terrible.
Scots? Native Americans. Genocide is genocide. And I was making the point that killing Bigfoot was a form of genocide. Where does Gino come from? Just like in Spanish, la gente. Those who have the same genes as you are a member of the people. They're a member of, as it said in Spanish, la gente, right?
Mm-hmm.
Genocide, the kind that you are, each according to his own kind. Now, the Sasquatch aren't us, but they're a lot different than us, from us than, dolphins or lions or tigers or bears. Mm-hmm. They're primates that share the same DNA as we do on our mother's side. I, for example, am a descendant on my matrilineal side from the oldest mitochondrial line of the 7 daughters of Eve, according to Professor Brian Sykes of Oxford. I am a descendant of Uma, UMA, the oldest matrilineal bloodline.
Wow. And
wasn't it interesting that as an American presidential candidate, a male descendant of Uma, the oldest of the 7 daughters of Eve, as Dr. Sykes called them, was speaking out for our cousins, the Sasquatch. And that's all I was doing. I wasn't, for example, suggesting that all Sasquatch were good. I mean, in one British Columbia location, some loggers were cutting down trees with chainsaws in their habitat, and a group of Sasquatch males came up and twisted all their necks and killed every one of them.
Oh.
As if to send the message to we humans, stop cutting down our habitat. We are arboreal primates. Stay away from our trees.
Yeah, wow.
And I've taken stories even recently from Gary Anderson, the broadcaster, where he was chased by a Sasquatch. So I wasn't asking people to, trust going up and giving their local Sasquatch a hug. I wasn't asking people to be naive about these different primates, but just to state that because they are half human on the female side, I mean, Patty, the Patterson-Gimlin Sasquatch, had breasts that were flopping along as she was quickly walking away from Patterson-Gimlin. Mm-hmm. So they have male and female. They are primates, but even more than that, their female line is modern human. They are genetic cousins of ours, and that's why I called for their protection when I ran for president.
That's awesome. Yeah.
In the law, 50% is often 100%, right? Mm-hmm. When we gave certain benefits to Native Americans, they had to prove that they were 50% Native American. So using that same rule of reason in American law, which I'm an expert in as a member of the U.S. District Court for the Western District of Washington, and somebody who studied the law at the University of Cambridge after getting my JD, my Juris Doctor, at Northwestern School of Law, Lewis and Clark College, also called Lewis and Clark, in Portland, Oregon, I knew that if Sasquatch were found to be 50% human, they needed to be protected from genocide, because in the law, 50% of ethnicity is enough. It gives that group standing, the right to go before court and say, grant our rights. We are Native Americans. Give us our rights. Stop treating us as prisoners of war. Mm-hmm. Give us at least income from our natural resources that you stole when you took our land away from us.
Right.
And the Great Spirit blessed me with a beautiful life partner who is 50% Native American. After a 100% Lakota Sioux, the great Chase Iron Eyes, my good friend who helped lead the Standing Rock protest to protect an aquifer that supplies fresh drinking water to 19 million Americans, when there's only 9 million Native Americans left all over the country. And they were shooting rubber bullets at the Standing Rock protesters.
Right.
That's why the first person that I asked to run with me in 2016 was Chase Iron Eyes of the Lakota Sioux, a lawyer and a brave that I respect.
Wow.
And what did they do? They took notice. This brilliant UCLA and Cambridge educated lawyer and writer and public philosopher who's been all over the radio has just asked a Native American brave who is also a Juris Doctor who helped lead the valorous and brave and completely inappropriate Standing Rock protests, and it would not faint of heart when we shot rubber bullets at him. He has asked that brave to be his running mate. Did that take notice within what we call the deep state? You betcha.
Yeah.
And that's when they attacked my vision. So let's wake up, America. We need to be awake and aware. And one of the things we have to do, if we're going to heal this country, is reach out and come to the aid of our Native American brothers and sisters. We have wronged them. We have taken away their land. We have placed them on reservations where, for example, the Lakota Sioux still have a male life expectancy of 42 years, when the life expectancy for white males is 85, for white females 95. And we have half that life expectancy, that expected longevity, on the Lakota Sioux reservation. The Native Americans are still listed as prisoners of war under American law. It was the U.S. Army, including the Civil War generals Phil Sheridan and William Tecumseh Sherman, who then went out west and fought the Indian Wars, which were a genocidal campaign against the remaining Native Americans of this country. And I do not approve of any of this.
No. Terrible.
And I have fought it with my life, and I will continue to do so. And I would urge all of us to do so.
Yes.
We all need to pray to Almighty God, which our Native American brothers and sisters know as the Great Spirit, the same entity, the Supreme Being who created everything, even the star people visiting us. We need to achieve truth, justice, and the American way as we claim in its actual application to the Native Americans of this country. We are not doing so. And we will never heal as a country until we do so.
Agreed.
And the Air Force officials I've talked to who say we can't because they're afraid of a Native American uprising, that is absolutely ridiculous paranoia. It is not possible, and it's not going to happen.
Right.
The Native Americans left only number 9 million. There are as many Polish Catholic Americans and Islamic Americans as Native Americans, and there's more Italian Americans than Native Americans. There's 15 million to 16 million Italian Americans. So it ain't going to happen. But what we need to do is we need to reverse the bad karma of what we did as a nation by righting the wrongs against the Native American people. Russell Means urged us to. His wife, Pearl Means, who just passed away recently, was a friend of friends of mine. They were righteous people. So if you want to be inspired by what a brave is, what a brave man is who stands up for his people, who stands up for men, women, and children, especially children first, and then women, and then men, go back and listen to some of the YouTubes of speeches by the great Russell Means. That was an American. That was a brave, like the founders of our country, like the General George Washington that I met. Look up the work of Russell Means. He was not some sponsor of the shootout at Wounded Knee. He was a man fighting for his people and doing a brave and highly articulate job doing it.
Wow. Yes. Awesome. Cheryl has a question. Has Andy ever seen Sasquatch?
Yes. At Great Lake Sagandaga in August of 1966, when I was a month shy of my 5th birthday, in September of 66. I was going to the outhouse at one of the public campgrounds on the shores of Great Lake Sagandaga, which was very sandy. It was sort of just a big sand dune type place. But it was kind of flat land. And I made a dogleg left to the outhouses. There were two, and there were two Sasquatch standing there. When I walked up to the outhouse on the left, I turned to the man. There was a boy next to him, also a Sasquatch. And I said, "Sir, would you like to use the restroom?" Because I was raised to be a polite kid, even though I was 5. I knew all that, and he didn't say anything to me. And then I went to the outhouse and did my business. And when I came out, they were standing in front of me, looking at me as I stepped down the little stairway in front of the outhouse. The adult Sasquatch was on my right, and his son or grandson or nephew or just some boy from his tribe was on my left, looking at me. The one on the right was about 7 feet tall and had light brown fur, and his face looked like Zayas of Planet of the Apes. The boy had dark fur, dark brown fur, and a widow's peak on his bulbous head, and looked a little bit more like Eddie on the Eddie Munster.
Munsters, yeah.
On the Munsters. And when I was kind of walking down the stairs, the older Sasquatch thrust his hand towards the younger Sasquatch and looked at me as if to say, "Look, he's your age. I invite you to play with them when you're here at Great Lake Sagandaga." Where, by the way, the Bartholomew brothers, I believe their names are John and Paul Bartholomew. I've communicated with Paul, and he's wished me a happy birthday a couple times on Facebook. But the Bartholomew brothers have studied the fact that Sasquatch sightings have been seen over and over and over again around Great Lake Sagandaga, this 18-foot long reservoir up against like a dam there in the Adirondacks of New York State. In fact, in Whitehall, New York, which is a city right on the northeastern corner of Great Lake Sagandaga, they actually have a statue of Sasquatch downtown, like, you know, my hometown of Morristown, New Jersey, and Morris Plains, New Jersey, get statues of George Washington. Yeah. They have a big human-sized, metal statue of Sasquatch. So yes, I met the two of them, and then I just gently sort of walked around the boy on the left side and walked back to the campground. When I made the turn, they were walking through the tall grass, and the older Sasquatch looked over at me and just moved his head ever so slightly in a very natural way, almost like an antelope looking at you on the plains of the Serengeti, kind of just slowly turning his gaze towards me.
Yeah.
And then 2 days later, when my father and 2 brothers went fishing in our small boat, which was like a 15 or 18-foot boat that my dad had made out of wood.
Wow.
With like a 15 or 18 power Evinrude outboard motor.
Wow.
The younger Sasquatch ran out of the woods and played keep away with my small little football. And I would throw it to him or throw it over in the grass, and he would go run it, and they would play keep away from me. But he liked playing with me so much that he would come over to me and he would headbutt me. He would slam his forehead into my forehead.
Ow. And
when he did, he had atrocious breath. He didn't smell, like people say Sasquatch has a very bad odor. He had terrible breath. He had halitosis. He smelled like a 6-year-old who had eaten meat, every year since he was like 6 months old or 1 year old, but never brushed his teeth. And he also had very sharp incisors. He had, like vampiric teeth.
Wow.
Unlike I could see on the older one. And when I confronted them when I came out of the outhouse. So yes, I not only met 2 Sasquatch, but they were all covered with hair, but one had light brown and one had dark brown. One was grown up and one was a boy my age. And the younger Sasquatch actually played with me a few days later, which I know from multiple people I've met in the Northwest here. They've had kids and neighborhood, children that live near them who have played with Sasquatch. It happens. They seek to relate to us as fellow primates. And they do human things like we do. They play. loved playing keep away with me, with that little tiny football that I had. You know, one of those small little rubber footballs.
Yeah.
And he had the athletic ability of a Heisman Trophy halfback, winner. He was just an incredible runner. So yes, I met two Sasquatch in Great Lake Sacandaga in the Adirondacks of New York State in August of 1966.
Wow. Sopranos Fan 11 asks, did Andy offer the Sasquatch a mint?
No.
No.
In fact, I didn't feed them anything. And I didn't have any evidence that they were cannibals or anything dangerous. They certainly didn't hurt me.
Right.
They could have abducted me or killed me and cannibalized me or whatever, and the older Sasquatch just showed me or suggested to me with his hand gesture that I should play with the boy,
Mm-hmm.
and then the boy did. So they didn't harm me, and they were peaceable. And I hadn't even heard what a Bigfoot was, but when I told my dad when I went back to the campsite after the first meeting with both of them,
Mm-hmm.
I was coming back from the outhouse.
Yeah.
My dad said, they were looking at you when you went into the restroom? And I said, yeah, Dad. They said, well, tell me about them. I said, well, they didn't have any clothes on. And he said, they didn't have any clothes on when they were watching you go into the outhouse? And I said, yeah, Dad, they didn't need to. He said, why not, son? And I said, they were all covered with fur. My dad actually stopped as we were walking over to the outhouse and looked up at the sky and laughed and said, oh, I see, son. You saw Bigfoot. Now, Aaron, that was what? A year before Patterson Gimlin's famous video of Patty at that Sasquatch near Bluff Creek, California.
Wow.
So I hadn't even heard of a Bigfoot.
That's
and
interesting.
I hadn't heard the word Sasquatch. But my dad called them, the ones I had encountered over at the outhouses, Bigfoot. And you must have seen Bigfoot.
Interesting. Now,
and that's the year before Patterson Gimlin.
I heard that that Patterson Gimlin, before the creature started walking away, it was rubbing its back on a tree. And after the creature left, they went and got that tuft of hair. And I guess they checked it.
And I rub my back on a tree when it's been itching. It's a human gesture. You can't rub your back.
Right.
So what do? You rub it on the sand, grass,
right,
a tree. Somebody scratches it for you.
Right.
You scratch my back, I'll scratch yours, or ancient human practice. So yes, they're primates and they do the same thing. But the difference is they're so hairy that how can they rub their back on a tree without leaving some hair or some skin? And that's what Melba Ketchum studied, as well as other detritus from Sasquatch.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Physical waste, feces and other things.
So that was true.
Said, look.
So that was true, you're saying?
Yes. Yes, and Dr. Ketchum had such physical evidence.
Awesome.
Just like we would study genetic evidence in a crime. That's what she was using. And that finding has been covered up by television. They're still saying, oh, let's go on an Expedition Bigfoot. Will we see a Sasquatch? Do we dare, disturb the universe and find a Sasquatch? Why do they never interview the distinguished biologist, Dr. Melba Ketchum? She's already proven their genetic similarity to us, the genetic commonality of their matrilineal DNA. And they're not even revealing that to the American people.
Wow.
Here in Cover Up America.
Interesting. Now, I have a question about the plasma confinement that Dr.
Right.
Sterling Colgate developed. You said it was like a plexiglass chamber, and then you walked in, a certain part of it had this opalescent pink and blue glowing plasma. Well, it
wasn't pink and blue. It was all the opalescent colors.
Oh, all
blue,
those.
Green,
okay.
Pink, orange. Yeah, it was opalescent. It was like an opal. It was the plasma under confinement in the far side of the chamber, which I guess was dense enough not to disperse. That's near where it was being emitted. Just as we see these plasma events like during, seismic grinding, during earthquakes and tsunamis and stuff. curve was hovering in the far end of the chamber, but it was multicolored, opalescent colors.
Interesting. And that was the radioactive stuff. Probably one of the reasons your dad had to give you those injections in your calves.
Well, he said he was giving me shots of vanadium every weekend in my left calf with his old medical kit from World War II, where he was a combat medic and ambulance driver with the 13th Airborne.
Oh, really?
In France and Germany, yeah. He would just take that kit out and give me a shot from an ampule of silver fluid. And I said, Dad, what is that? Why are you giving me that? And he said, it's vanadium, element 23. I said, why are you giving it to me? And he said, to protect your teeth and bones from radiation. That was probably because he knew I was headed in a couple of years for the plasma confinement chamber.
Wow.
And he knew that because when he went to Gettysburg, from that plasma confinement chamber in East Hanover, New Jersey, under the direction of Dr. Colgate, at that age, when he was heavier, when he just stopped smoking in 1954,
yeah,
when he looked to his right and saw me at Gettysburg, I was like 4 or 5 years older than when he went to Gettysburg.
right.
So he knew I was headed for plasma confinement.
Sure.
Probably under Dr. Colgate, and from that very place he had been sent to Gettysburg.
Wow.
So as to arrive on November 19th.
So he might have been the guinea pig for you, for himself.
Well, I don't like the phrase guinea pig because we were America's earliest time-space explorers.
Right,
We
right.
were taking risks, but that's what explorers do. Look, three of the Mercury astronauts died on the ground. What was it? Grissom, White, and Chaffee.
Uh-huh.
And 7 of the Challenger space shuttle astronauts, 7 of the Columbia space shuttle astronauts, including my late friend and colleague William Cameron McCool from the Mars Project, or Project Mars as we're calling it. And that's 17 Americans died just going into space via rocketry.
Yeah.
So were we guinea pigs? Was Krista McCullough and Judy Resnick and Ellison Onizuka and Ron McNair of the Challenger, were they guinea pigs? No, they were brave American space explorers who died in action.
Right.
And people do that when they jump out of planes.
Yes.
So no, we weren't guinea pigs. They had already proven all of these technologies relatively safe when I was exposed.
I'm sorry I said guinea pig.
They just know the longitudinal effects.
Right.
But they didn't even know the longitudinal effects of automobiles. They didn't know that there was going to be 50,000 deaths and 300,000 catastrophic injuries every year in America from Henry Ford's Model A's and Model T's.
Mm-hmm. Cheryl asks, did they speak? I think she's talking about the Sasquatch. Did they speak or grunt?
No, they did not speak English.
Or grunting?
And one of the strangest behaviors I mentioned, which was the headbutting.
Right.
That young Sasquatch gave me a splitting headache, headbutting me.
Ouch.
In sort of affection or expressing the joy of playing with me. Didn't do anything weird. Didn't touch my body. Didn't try any kind of weird sexual assault or physical assault.
Wow.
I didn't touch any other part of my body. He just butted his forehead against mine. And it was built up in a more pronounced, bony cranium than mine. And I left that field at our campsite near Great Lakes, Sacandaga, with a splitting headache. I had to actually take a couple children's
aspirin,
St. Joseph's aspirin for children. Remember the delicious orange one?
Oh, the orange ones.
And take a nap on my sleeping bag and air mattress because he had caused such a terrific headache from headbutting.
Wow.
I don't think he was trying to hurt me. I just think that was a Sasquatch expression of joy and friendship.
Yeah.
Appreciation for playing with him.
Yeah. Probably watches the baby rams playing like that. They butt heads all the time.
Well, I mean, athletes do that when they're playing. Football players will slam their helmets together, or pat each other on the butt or the shoulders or whatever.
Sure. Yeah.
So I think it's a primate type of pattern that primate was showing. I don't think it was an assault of headbutting. Just, thanks for being my friend and playing with me.
Yeah, that's nice.
I'm a lonely Sasquatch here in a predominantly modern Homo sapiens vaping campground. But like I said, if you want to see Sasquatch, camp out on the shores of Great Lake Sacandaga, because there you have one of the greatest chances of encountering Sasquatch, even seeing them, maybe even meeting them. Talk to the scholars in Whitehall, New York, on the northeast corner of Sacandaga.
Wow. I had the pleasure of camping out at the Adirondacks in New York. Beautiful, beautiful countryside up there.
Clean. Oh, incredible. New York State is an incredible state.
Clean water, the streams. We drank out of the streams. It was really just something else.
Not good. You don't want to do that. You want to avoid that. To avoid giardia, I believe that's what it's called, which is a kind of amoebic dysentery from urine from deers and other wild creatures.
Sure.
And you can never get over it. You'll be having the runs for the rest of your life.
Well, I think
you don't want to drink from streams. You want to drink from springs or water that you take into wild areas that's been purified.
Yeah.
So just food for thought. You don't want to drink from streams. I was always drinking from springs in New Jersey, but they were coming out of the ground.
Okay.
And incredibly fresh. And springs are clean because by sinking from rainwater into the springs, they've been filtered. But the problem with river water or creeks is the urine of wild animals that has
no.
different...
This was like a very, just bubbling up. I mean, it was not very deep, maybe an inch deep. It was super clear and it wasn't very wide. So I think it was, like you're saying, I think it was probably
Well, if it was bubbling up as a spring, it was a lot safer than a river.
Yeah, I wouldn't...
You're talking about just going to a creek or a river anywhere in the U.S.
No, I wouldn't.
Your canteen and filling it.
I would never do. I would never do that. But this was exceptionally clean and yeah.
I think it's called giardia. I may be mistaken, but
okay.
I knew somebody in California who had that. It's quite serious. It's a kind of a constant amoebic dysentery that is a form of diarrhea that you can't really control except with constant constipation. That's not fun at all.
No.
So you want to avoid that.
Yeah, that's yeah. Remember that saying anal retentive? Oh, he's being anal retentive. I always thought instead of that, I always said he's showing his kind of stupidity. That's what I would say. That's my little joke for the day. Let's see. Any more questions out there? Let's see. Let me check the my email. See if anyone sent any. Nope, just the one from Cheryl.
Knowledge is good. Knowledge gives us power, right?
Oh, yeah.
We learned tonight that Sasquatch is real. And by the way, look at the title of Stacy Keach's program, Sasquatch, When Legend Meets Science. Mm-hmm. Legend Meets Science from the town of Whitehall, New York, was building a metal statue to recognize the Sasquatch presence in their community, their locality. No, it was never a legend. It was seen by our 26th president, Theodore Roosevelt, when he was on his great North American ape expedition, and one of his team members went into the woods to urinate and scared a Sasquatch into their campfire when he was coming back to the campground. So our 26th president encountered Sasquatch, and 100 years later, we were having a brilliant actor narrate a documentary called Sasquatch, When Legend Meets Science. No, how about when the history of our 26th president meets science, okay?
Yeah.
Or when the findings of the brilliant Dr. Melba Ketchum meet television, okay, rather than killing Bigfoot.
Right.
Okay?
Yes.
That's why I made that provision in my 100 proposals.
Okay.
Just as I was disgusted by the continued abuse and genocide being directed at Native Americans, I was sickened and disheartened and disgusted by the genocidal context of killing Bigfoot.
Yes, I agree.
The genocidal implication of that show.
Dark Brain has a question. He says,
Yes.
question for Andrew. Regarding heaven being on a planet around Polaris, what is the significance of Polaris not being the pole star millennia in the past and in the future? Because if precession? Oh. So I guess he's saying...
I want to clarify that question. What I was told by CIA was not that heaven was a planet or star within the Polaris constellation, but was the Polaris constellation.
Oh.
That is the heavenly realm. That is heaven.
So it's not a planet. It's just some heavenly realm that we can't...
It's a heavenly realm. And in other words, there always was an organic nature to heaven. In other words, this admission by CIA to me clarifies that peculiar dichotomy or dyssynchrony, if you will, that lack of a logical understanding. And how could we be speaking about God making the heavens and the earth, or heaven and earth, and then that heaven was sort of in some other dimension when we died? No, our spirits go there, but they're still in the cosmos. They're in one of the constellations that processes our soul. Polaris. That's what I was told.
Okay. Interesting. So
now, the precession issue begs the question of, well, if the Polaris constellation, through precession, become in another position in the cosmos, that's probably where our soul still goes at death. But what I was told was that the CIA had proven that when the spirit leaves the body, it goes directly due north.
Wow.
True north.
Wow.
Literally down to the very split in the compass. In other words, the exact true north on the compass.
Wow.
And I mentioned that when my father passed away, I could see from the position of his body when I tried to see if he was dead and try to revive him if possible with CPR.
Oh my God.
When I was checking his vitals and everything.
Oh.
That when his spirit left his body, it left through his head. After my mother and I had heard a woman sort of reasoning with him early in the morning, and his spirit clearly left his body, not only right through the top of the head, but his head was pointed directly true north. And I took out a compass and I held it to the center of my dad's head where he was laying in bed there. And he died in his sleep, thank God, with no apparent, conscious pain.
Mm-hmm.
And as he deserved as a great American and a great world citizen. And the compass read directly true north.
Wow.
To the very direction his features, his disposition at the time of death was oriented by his physical position and his expression. It pointed true north.
Wow.
So there I had evidence in the passing of my own late great father that we go true north when we die. And I think something in Scripture says, to the people of the north was given something like the true nature of things or the true origin of things. I think what they were referring there was the saints and angels, the spirit guides in the Polaris constellation.
Wow.
Just a theory. They didn't tell me about that. Those are some of my extrapolations from that limited revelation they made to me, that limited, that sort of limited public hangout that they knew where heaven was. Mm-hmm. So my point was, look, that makes total sense because there had always been that strange, inexplicable dichotomy between heaven and the heavens, between basically religious truth and astronomical truth. There is none because we go to Polaris, the North Star, true north. Do you ever wonder why they call it true north?
Yeah.
They don't call it true south. Oh, let me check on my compass where true south is. No, they only cover true east or true west or true
Alabama.
South by southeast.
That's Texas.
Right?
Texas.
They only talk about true north. Why do they call it true north? apparently because Polaris is heaven and encompasses truth. What do we review when we go there? The truth of what we've learned from our experience in our last life. And then we compare it to our previous lives.
Wow. So interesting. Now, when you were sent to Gettysburg, like you mentioned, your father was sent there. You saw your father there. He denied that you were there. The old man gave you a pair of old size 13 shoes or something like that. And when you said
Before I went down to Evergreen Cemetery to see Lincoln's address, that was John Lawrence Burns up at David Kendall Hart and Eliza Ann Bowen's millinery shop on the main street there in Gettysburg. And still there.
Mm-hmm. Wow. And
they're selling like t-shirts and stuff there now.
People looked very skinny there. Did you notice that too? Did that strike you that, wow, these people really look skinny?
It didn't strike me until I went over to where I was photographed and those men standing to my left, but they're on the right side of the image because the camera was behind us relative to the dais, right? The dais was behind us.
Yeah.
But we were in front of the camera, which was either Matthew Brady or his assistant, George Bachrock.
Okay.
We don't really know. Certainly looked like Brady. When I looked over at those circle of men there standing to my left, I thought, God, they're really not as tall as modern men like my dad, and they are starving. Now, why were the people of Gettysburg starving? Gettysburg was both a farm town and a crossroads town. All of the street names like Washington and Baltimore and Emmitsburg, Pike, they were all the direction that those streets pointed as a crossroads town. The other eastern United States cities and towns that they pointed to. So the people of Gettysburg were starving after the worst battle in the history of the Western Hemisphere, one that caused 50,000 deaths in 3 days, July 1st, 2nd, 3rd of 1863, as would die during the entire 13 years of the Vietnam conflict from this country, American soldiers in Vietnam. Died in just 3 days in July of 63. And as that terrible battle swept through their town and to the farmlands around their town, a lot of their crops were destroyed. And they were starving. And
sad.
The Confederates had even come in and rifled their money and their food supplies before the battle or during the battle when they came into Gettysburg. And so they were a domestic population that was starving. So when the great president of the United States, Abraham Lincoln, came to speak there, Aaron, the cheer that went up for the rail splitter, that son of Kentucky, Abraham Lincoln, was incredible.
Wow.
You could hear bands starting to play, men cheering in their full throaty voices, women yelling and crying, and kids screaming and clapping and cheering. It was just amazing. It was like this throng of support for somebody that I have never heard before or since. It wasn't like, Bruce Springsteen coming out on stage. Bruce always gets a great response because he was a great musician and a great American troubadour and, songwriter. I think up there with Walt Whitman and will be remembered as such in American letters. And I'm happy that I crossed paths with Bruce back in 1959 in New Jersey. Never met him, but I crossed paths with him.
Sure.
But it wasn't like Bruce coming on stage, which I've seen a couple times. It was incredible that Lincoln stepped up on the stage there, the dais.
Wow.
On the northern side, the northern edge of the Evergreen Cemetery. It was like, hurrah! And it was just everybody screaming at the same time.
Wow. So Abe Lincoln was the first rock star, maybe. Yeah.
Well, yeah, he was the president of the United States who was leading them and would still be leading them through 2 more years of civil war in which, soldiers from different cities who had gone to high school with the same guy would go into a battle and maybe half of them would be killed.
Unreal.
So, college professors in the North, for example, were becoming depressed and retiring because so many of their graduating seniors were being killed in the Civil War.
Oh, my.
We lost, about 600,000 soldiers during the war?
Horrifying. Yes.
And
the worst.
And they were just overjoyed and incredibly enthusiastic as they were starving in light of the damage that had been done to their farmlands and their crossroads trading. As a crossroads southern Pennsylvania town, that Abe Lincoln was coming to talk to them, to show up and acknowledge that they were on the map, that they had been damaged by the Battle of Gettysburg.
Wow.
The worst land battle in the history of the Western Hemisphere, before or since.
Wow.
Or ever.
Wow.
So it was incredibly emotional. And there was all that resonance from all the battlefield dead in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. You know, when Mount Diablo in California had that transformer explode a number of years ago, a group of teenage hikers saw through the cascade of sparks and saw a natural form of chronovision in which they saw a U.S. Civil War battle being fought. Although, what do you know? There weren't any Civil War battles in California, just like there weren't any in New Jersey. When the lady from DARPA said, "We think that battle is now over this location in New Jersey." So everything comes to pass, but not to stay, but it is never destroyed. There is a time-space continuum. So if you're interested in ghosts of the Civil War, I invite any of our listeners to spend a night camping on a sleeping bag, even a little pup tent, and they could find happening to them what happened to me when I was staying in a hotel in downtown Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, on the Civil War battlegrounds or near it in 2013, when I woke up in the middle of the night and a U.S. A Union officer walked right towards me before fading out.
Wow.
And thank God he didn't have a musket. There's been many, many Civil War ghosts, many. There was one covered by Unsolved Mysteries. People would see somebody bleeding to death in a Union or Confederate uniform. It's happened over and over and over again in Gettysburg. Also in the Shiloh battlefield in Tennessee, where my late dad and I witnessed a Confederate soldier walking along. And he walked right through the corner of the right side of our Chevy Impala station wagon, and then off into this cornfield on the side of the road. Not through the corn road, but into the corn. Now, I invite anybody to try that without smacking their face and falling down on the ground. You can't run. You can run through corn roads, but in other words, between them, but you can't run into a row of corn and it disappear within its interior.
Right. Wow.
Ghosts did, because they're not there. They're residual hauntings. At least that type of ghost did. But I've seen a Confederate soldier in Shiloh, and I saw a Union officer in Gettysburg. One during the broad daylight, the Confederate, and the Union officer in Gettysburg at 2:00 in the morning. And I literally was shaking. I had to get up and just take a drink of soda in my bed or something. And I forget what it was, maybe some vitamin C or something. I just tried to calm down and make sure that I hadn't damaged my nervous system.
Right.
I took some kind of supplement that I was on at that time. It might have been blue-green algae or something. But I took a long pause in my sleeping because I was so shaken up by seeing that that Union officer, that ghost.
Wow. We had a
question. As I mentioned, regarding that Josephine Cobb image that shows me in what was until 2007, the only surviving picture of Lincoln at Gettysburg on the day he gave the famous Gettysburg Address there.
Yeah.
As a result, I was the only modern human being featured in Ken and Rick Burns' The Civil War. I appear at the beginning of the 18th episode, which was entitled The Gettysburg Address.
Cool.
I'm right in the beginning of that episode. And I haven't even approached Ken and Rick Burns, because I'm sure if I did, I'm sure they'd respond like Professor Henry Graff did at Columbia when I said, listen, Professor Graff, I know everything about Obama during those years. He was in a classified defense-related research and development program that was going to Mars via a revolutionary quantum access device. And he didn't even respond to me, even though he was a professor emeritus of history at Columbia. And I explained to him how I had a bachelor's in American history from UCLA, another fine history program. Some of the best historians in America, at least then, when I was going there. I don't know about now, probably now as well. And so in the same way that Professor Graff said, well, this guy is some wackadoodle, I'm not even going to respond to his phone calls and emails, I knew if I contacted Ken and Rick Burns, they would say, this guy must be a wackadoodle. He could be the only living American to appear in our, famous award-winning, Emmy award-winning documentary, The Civil War, released in 1989 when he was 28 years old. He can't be. How could he have been in Gettysburg? So they wouldn't have believed me, so I didn't even contact Ken and Rick Burns. But wow. Ken Burns, if you're listening, it's true. I was in your famous documentary. I am in the beginning of the Gettysburg Address episode as narrated by Sam Waterston as the voice of Lincoln. That was me in the left side of the famous Josephine Cobb image, the first last until 2007 to show Lincoln at Gettysburg.
Yes. Wow. And
I never talked to Shelby Foote about it. I never talked to David McCulloch. I never talked to my history professors at UCLA. They would never believe me.
Well, they owe you some residuals, I would say.
Well, I'd like to maybe file under SAG and get a SAG card.
Do it. Do it.
Appearing with Jesse Ventura and doing some acting.
Yeah.
Appearing with William Shatner and doing some acting.
There you go.
Appearing with Bill Ryan and Kerry Cassidy of Project Camelot and doing a little bit of acting. So maybe I will if I want to get a SAG card. But, I've never gotten an acting card because I don't want it claimed of me that I've been acting and sharing my experiences any more than I've written fiction. I've abstained from fiction because I don't want to be accused of writing up fiction when I've talked about my experiences and written about them.
Interesting. Now, you
got to wonder, you got to make choices like that so you know that you're not misunderstood.
Mm-hmm. Now, speaking of the shoes, you've mentioned this before. I think it's a very fascinating part of the story. They're very old shoes, size 13. When you came back, they kind of fell apart. They aged in 100 years in 1 second, right?
Yes, because I was bringing them from 1863 to 1972, which is 109 years into the future. They simply fell apart on the floor of the plasma confinement chamber.
Wow.
I think I even stepped out of the soles of them in the plasma confinement chamber. Before my dad came over and said, what the hell were you doing? I said, what do you mean, Dad? He said, we sent you to Gettysburg to see Lincoln give the Gettysburg Address, and you just stood there like a goddamn statue. What were you thinking? And I said, well, Dad, I didn't want to be arrested by Union officers. Wasn't I given training in this program not to be arrested? Didn't I have a scrolled up letter to Gideon Welles of the U.S. Navy, the Navy Secretary for Lincoln, to offer me aid and assistance in the field if I was arrested or captured or wounded? So no, I went away from the dais because everybody was noticing me. Like those 2 Union officers who quizzed me.
Right.
I was evading being captured. That's what I was trained to do. I was just doing what I was trained to do. But he was disappointed that I didn't get to see Lincoln give the Gettysburg Address. But because I was afraid to watch Lincoln give the Gettysburg Address and be standing right at his feet, right at his ankles or knees when he was up on the dais, and because I'd seen that famous 1863 picture of Lincoln by Alexander Gardner, where he's kind of looking forward and kind of smoldering like an ape with that uniquely simian beard growth of his.
Yeah.
some of the only that goes all the way around the mouth as well as the creases,
Yeah.
which is very simian,
Uh-huh.
a very alternate primate.
Uh-huh.
I was really afraid to stand there and see Lincoln give the Gettysburg Address. It was also kind of fear
Uh-huh.
that made me so readily invoke my training and avoid capture
Uh-huh.
by walking away from the dais. But I asked my dad, what was it like? What was Lincoln like? And he said, just a man with a beard on a stage giving a speech. And I said, well, was there anything unusual? He said, yeah. One thing I remember is that Lincoln had a very scratchy voice. And I said, really, Dad, what did it sound like? And he said, 7 years ago, a new nation conceived in liberty, that whole thing.
Wow.
And he kind of did this scratchy kind of, and then I later found out, I may have even shared it with my dad many years later, because he died about 18 years later, that we found that Lincoln had Marfan syndrome, and that explains the way he shuffled into Ford Theater. When I saw him and Mrs. Lincoln during that, or he and Mrs. Lincoln during that probe, and it would explain why my dad's description of his voice was a kind of scratchy, pinched twang of a voice. It was like a Midwesterner from, Kentucky, Indiana, Illinois, when he left like Springfield, Illinois to come to D.C., right, to become president.
Yeah.
Dressed as a woman under the Pinkerton agent who was protecting him. Do you know what that Pinkerton agent's name was, Aaron?
No, what?
John Kennedy.
John Kennedy. Wow. His middle
Yeah,
name
that's
was
one of the 100 Lincoln Kennedy coincidences that I've documented.
Wow.
Originating some of them and just recording others. But that's not one of mine discovered. That's another person's discovered. But yes, the Pinkerton agent who brought Lincoln to Washington via Baltimore to be sworn in as our 16th president in 1860. Actually, that would have been January or March of 61, right? I guess that was March when they would swear them in during those years. Maybe they had already moved it up to January 20th. Was named John Kennedy.
Wow.
What are the chances?
Yeah, that's crazy. Austin Morris asks, he's asking for a friend of his. Do animals react to time travelers, especially horses?
I don't know. I was living fairly recently in a town in California, and the horse across the way would always winnow at me, but not others. I've always been very good with horses. They've always come right up to me and let me pet them and feed them carrots and stuff. They've never reared up on their hind legs at me, although I've never ridden horses in this lifetime. Not something that I felt a need to do because I did so much in a previous life in England. I did devour the black stallion works of Walter Farley. I even wrote him when I was in the 3rd grade, and he responded.
Wow.
I don't know, but I've also had very good rapport with dogs.
Okay.
Cats have loved me and always come up and brush up against me. When I've been in different states in the West, Washington, Oregon, California, Arizona, New Mexico, Nevada, rabbits have always tried to make my company by coming right up to me and even trying to walk into houses.
Wow.
To meet me and spend time with me. And they've also collected in great number, like in backyards where I've just been sitting on a lawn chair. So that's an interesting concept. I've never thought about that. But maybe there's something about our noetic field, our spirituality, that gets shifted with time travel and other forms of sort of noetic growth in life. I wouldn't be surprised if perhaps somebody as advanced as Mohandas K. Gandhi also had this kind of animal attraction. It's an interesting concept, but yes, I have had a pronounced form of animal attraction. I've never been bitten by an animal. I've never been scratched by an animal, although I've been confronted by dogs, cats, bears, cougars, all kinds of fish in both freshwater and the oceans, sharks, when I've been body surfing. I simply have never been attacked by any animal. And yet I've had friends and family members who have been. So it can't seem to be any kind of pheromone that I'm giving off as a member of my family, or as a Caucasian male American wearing underarm deodorant or whatever. I don't know, but I've had very good luck with animals in this lifetime. They love me.
Okay. Cool.
Even squirrels and chipmunks have come up to be fed by me, and when I've just thrown like one cashew to them, they come the same day, at the same time every day, and have even eaten right out of my hands. Dogs have actually jumped up into my arms while I've been standing. I've had to catch them.
Wow. Yeah.
So, yes, I do seem to have some kind of animal attraction. Elephants have let me come up and pet them without stomping me. And I have. What else? Moose. I had elk right in front of me, and they tried to kick a guy right next to us in Yosemite, but they didn't touch me. Of course, I wasn't trying to pet them, because you don't try to pet wild elk.
No.
Or other wild animals. I petted circus animals or zoo animals.
Never pet an elk.
Graham crackers.
Never pet an elk or any other of their ilk. Ilk.
Correct.
Boom.
Yeah.
There we are.
Yeah. But I know I've never been attacked by an animal. God willing, I never will be. I have very good karma. I've always been very loving towards animals. Never hurt them. Always fed them. Always petted them. If they're domesticated animals, I've just never been bitten. But I know people have been bitten by Chihuahuas, French poodles, German shepherds, Doberman pinschers.
Okay.
What are those terriers? What are those pit bulls? I did have a pit bull come up and hit me in the chest, but then he turned around and walked away. He just menaced me, but didn't bite me. That's not really always true of pit bulls.
Right.
They'll bite you in the neck.
Oh yeah.
So I don't know why, but if it was my time travel, maybe there was some aspect of a kind of a noetic shift in my energy field that the animal trusts.
Okay, that makes sense. Back from the Future asks, Andy, in the future, are there operational time machines still active?
Well, there have to be, because we were getting back from 2045 back to 1972.
Okay.
Through teleporters. So there have to be teleporters still operating in 2045. So I think the answer to that question is yes.
Okay. Here's another question. Question, Andy. When you were at Gettysburg, did you have memory of Morris planes, or were you strictly not in that moment? So did you have your normal memories?
That's a good question. No, I had full cognizance.
Okay.
I was myself.
Okay.
In a different time place. A time-space location is a certain location shifted in time and space. So I was in the same space as modern Gettysburg. In fact, my dad showed me how they knew where the roads were in Gettysburg, because they're still there. That's why they was able to give me directions about how to walk into Gettysburg and then over to Evergreen Cemetery to see Lincoln's speech when he arrived. So I was in a different time in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, 1863 rather than 1972.
Right.
But I was in the same place. So what was I in? A different time, place, a different time, space coordinate.
Right.
But I remembered fully who I was.
Okay.
If they had said, what day were you born? I would, where, I would have said Morristown, New Jersey, September 18th, 1961. I knew who I was. I brought my full memories.
Okay.
And that's really kind of hopeful if we do prove that this age regression that's been rumored is actually being done. Because one of my questions about that is, look, if they de-age you from, let's say, age 80 to 20,
yeah,
on that kind of 20-year cycle of which time has that natural rhythm on Earth, like as indicated by tree ring samples and so forth. And the time travel to the past that I was doing in Pegasus was often on a 20-year increment. How could they de-age your brain and reduce the wrinkling on your brain, the crenulation, and have you retain your memories, your learning, and thereby your wisdom of your experience if they de-aged you? Would you be 20 again with all the sort of liminal stage issues of a 20-year-old? Where am I going to go to college? Who am I going to marry? What am I going to do with my life? Or would I be Andy at 80 in a 20-year-old body like I was myself in Gettysburg in 1863? I don't know, but I think that's kind of an obvious question that we have to ask of the defense contractor that is rumored to be in possession of age regression.
Yeah.
Which I'm not planning on releasing anytime soon.
So you were age progressed, but when you were progressed, you didn't have any new knowledge of when you were older, did you?
No, when I was age progressed, that's another good example. When I was age progressed, I still had my 10-year-old consciousness. I just had a 45 or 50-year-old body, complete with the post-pubescent development of an adult male. So a lot more hair, to be as specific as I want to be with that. So hair in certain places, okay? And that's what the male, shift at adolescence, right?
Right.
And it was very surprising to see myself in an older body like that. It wasn't an old body, but it was a middle-aged body. But I still had a 10-year-old mind. I was still reading Huckleberry Finn, The Grapes of Wrath, and Moby Dick by Twain, Steinbeck, and Melville with the rapt interest of a fourth grader or fifth grader. So I was still my brain in an older body. So maybe when they do age regress us, which I think will ultimately be available to many people of this generation, at least distinguished Americans or those who have served the Defense Department, they probably are not getting rid of our brains.
Good.
I mean, I do not want to get rid of my advanced education. I mean, I have 5 post-secondary degrees. Why would I want to just dump that?
And that's an interesting thing to people, because this is something interesting. Now, we could be calling Andy Dr. Andrew D. Basiago, because he's got his Juris Doctor.
That would be entirely appropriate.
He has his Juris Doctor.
In the British Commonwealth, Aaron, in the British Commonwealth, Britain, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand, particularly Britain, they call Juris Doctors doctor. So if you got a law degree in America and went to, let's say, Oxford for a master's, do you know who you would be?
A doctor.
Dr. Moriarty.
Hey, that might help my career.
Yeah, that'll certainly help your literary career.
Yeah.
So I want that established in America. The women who are lawyers, the lawyers who are women in this country are making a good point. When American lawyers pass the bar and go into private practice, they so-called put up their shingle, do you know what they're called?
No.
Esquire. You know what an esquire is?
Used to be a magazine, but what is it? Esquire.
I think it still exists. But no, an esquire is halfway between a lord and a gentleman. Why are we calling female lawyers who have passed the bar and gone into practice, Jane Smith, Esquire, Sally Jones, Esquire? No. They're giving a male honorific title of being halfway between a lord and a gentleman to all American lawyers. So what's the solution to that? Well, if we call them JD, like we call MD, MBs, what's the problem with that? Well, the problem with that is that a JD can have gotten a doctoral degree in law, a Juris Doctor, and not pass the bar, so they can practice law. Not have passed the bar exam, been cleared ethically and in terms of criminal history and psychiatric condition and so forth by their state bar organization, their state bar association. So what is the answer? My solution, which I'm going to be advancing before the American Bar Association, is to begin calling all holders of the Juris Doctor, doctor, and then those who have passed the bar, barrister, doctor. So if I appeared before a court here in Washington State, I would be Barrister Dr. Basiago. Why? Because my bar membership would be in Washington. That would be the one I would rely on. And my Juris Doctor was across the mighty Columbia at Lewis and Clark in Portland, Oregon. But I would be Barrister Dr. Basiago. But if, let's say, the holder of a JD from Lewis and Clark was just assisting another lawyer, like under the student appearance rule, that had not yet been admitted to, let's say, the Oregon or Washington bars, would it be appropriate to call that JD doctor? Yes. But barrister? No. He wouldn't be a member, or she wouldn't be a member of the bar. Mm-hmm. So that's the answer, is to call all earners of the Juris Doctor degree, which is necessary to be admitted to the bar, and a JD from an ABA-approved law school. It's like 600 in America. Doctor. But then when they pass the bar, barrister, doctor, so-and-so. That solves it. No Esquire, no JD, none of that nonsense. But in England, when I was at Cambridge, after earning my law degree from Lewis and Clark in Oregon, but before passing the state bar here in Washington, the university and the officials at my college, Magdalen, were calling me Dr.
Bless you.
Dr. Andrew D. Basiago.
As a nice,
I didn't ask them to do that.
It has a nice ring to it.
That's the tradition in England, in Britain, as they say.
Well, Dr. Basiago, I think that sounds like a good title. I like that.
Or you can even call me Federal Barrister Dr. Basiago, because I'm admitted now at the federal level as well. So there's different ways of solving this by relying on the doctoral attainment of a all-American lawyer after getting a terminal doctoral degree with the Juris Doctor. We call it 4-year DDSs, Doctors of Dental Surgery. Mm-hmm. We call 3 or 4 years of whatever the person needs to pass med school an MD, Doctor so-and-so. Why don't we call American lawyers doctor? They've done at least 3 years of terminal study in the law.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That SJD is just a doctor of law that's not even necessary. It's just another study of law at the doctoral level.
Okay.
Yeah. The actual doctor of law. But the Juris Doctor is the terminal degree to be a doctor of legal work, of legal reasoning. So of legal writing, of legal, service, legal professional representation of others. So why don't they call American lawyers doctor? They shouldn't be calling them the women in the law Esquire. That's not fair. Any more than calling male civil rights activists or feminists Ms. Would a man who believes in feminism feel it appropriate to be called Ms. Anderson or whatever his last name is? I don't think so.
No.
It's not appropriate.
No.
So it's not appropriate to ask all of those brilliant and crusading women who are now, I think, the majority in the American legal system, Esquire. It's a male title. Very, very sexist and anachronistic. We need to update that practice in the law in America. And that's one area where the British are providing us a traditional study that we never should have done.
Okay. I couldn't really hear the last part of that sentence, but
you couldn't hear that?
No. It was muffled.
What I was saying was, it would make sense to begin calling American lawyers doctor, because it's not fair to the brave and crusading designating American women who have become lawyers and passed the bar and are practicing to call them Esquire, any more than a man who believes in feminist causes would feel comfortably being called Ms.
Right.
Because there's a Ms. Magazine or Miss Betty Friedan or whatever. Okay, it's not accurate. It's not an appropriate designation.
Okay. All right.
And I think they started, by the way, there were like statues printed of Ben Franklin, and to identify him as somebody in the American system between a lord and a gentleman, but not like president or vice president. Even the French began creating statues of Ben Franklin that would say B. Franklin, comma, ESQ, Esquire. That was to identify Franklin as somewhere between a lord and a gentleman. But we had no House of Lords. But we knew he was a gentleman, but of our nation, of our culture, our country. So they just chose to start calling Franklin an Esquire, and that began to be picked up by American lawyers in practice because they wanted to be known as special, initially gentlemen, who had a special status to stand before the bar in the court, not because they worked for the British Accreditation Agency, which never existed, but because as members of the Bar Association, they could step in front of the bar and argue somebody, or at the bar, and argue somebody's case.
Oh, okay.
That's all lawyers can do. They can represent people before courts, hearings, and tribunals. They can sign legal documents, which is known as attornment, which makes them attorneys, or they can appear, or they can give them legal advice. Those are the only three things that attorneys or attorneys can do.
Okay.
All right. But they are not all Esquires, because I believe now the majority, certainly the majority of individuals in law school presently are female. I believe that there are now more American female attorneys than male.
Okay.
Why are we forcing those ladies to be called Esquire just because they're in private practice?
Right.
I wouldn't want to be called Ms. just because I'm a feminist male. I believe in equal time, equal pay for equal work, and equal opportunity for American women, and equal respect, and equal dignity.
Yeah.
That's why I say I'm a feminist, okay? But believe me, I don't have a bra to burn, okay? I'm not an original feminist, okay? But I would not want to be called Ms. just because I believe in major substrates of the feminist cause, the feminist position.
Yeah.
I believe we should come up with a new solution to refer to men and women from America in private practice. That's simply to call them doctor.
Okay. Dr.
Smith, Dr. Jones, Dr. Anderson. And imagine the dignity and the sort of respect for the profession that would cultivate among American lawyers.
Good point.
And make the too many of them that are what are politely known as shysters actually dignified representatives of truth, justice, and the American way.
There you go.
Maybe more of them would be coming forward like I did to acknowledge what they've done for the U.S. government.
Speaking of people coming forward and acknowledging, I have a question from Brake Davis, and it's a question I could answer with yes, 8 people. The question is, at Andy, question, do you have any other people to corroborate your story? And if so, will they ever come out and talk about it, maybe on this show? Well,
I have brought forward numerous people to corroborate my experiences between 1980 and 84, including 4 individuals who confirmed that they were on the surface of the red planet when I was stating that I was on the surface of the red planet with them. I've described how in the case of Project Pegasus, which was 10 years earlier from when I was in Pegasus from 1968 to 72. So 1971, a year before I left Pegasus, was 10 years before I even entered the Mars program. And I've described how when I was in it in 1968, 69, 70, most of the people I met and worked with were mid-career professionals who are already deceased. My father, Dr. Harold M. Agnew, Dr. Edward Teller, Dr. Sterling Colgate, and so forth. But did they corroborate my account? I gave the description of my discussions with Agnew, with Colgate, with Captain Lewis Wary, who saw the teleporter Curtis Wright, with my father, with Courtney M. Hunt of the CIA, who I served with in both Project Pegasus and Project Mars. So this is really an anachronistic question. I mean that respectfully, but on a previous episode of The Quest for Truth, I described all of the corroboration by others that immediately took my memories out of the realm of a possible psychiatric condition. For example, when I called Captain Lewis Wary, who was a doctor of engineering and a captain in like the Coast Guard, who was involved in marine accident reconstruction cases as an engineer, he described the teleport on Curtis Wright. But when I asked him to sign an affidavit for me, he panicked and shut up. When I was talking to Dr. Robert Beckwith and did 2 interviews with him, and Alexander Bruce and R. Ken Thomas each did an interview with him, that's 4 interviews by 3 professional journalists. When I continued to question Beckwith with a 3rd phone call, he said, look, I'm not going to have any more discussions of classified projects with it, like this with you or on the phone. So you have to understand that I was revealing the truth about a top secret or above top secret defense aspect of our defense community. They threatened my life if I came forward. You think I'm going to get a bunch of people from the program to come forward? They were a bunch of old guys who were worrying about their retirement paying their lives. They were chicken. Even my dad had me come forward, but he couldn't come forward even to my own family members because if he did, he had been threatened with being killed. He had actually probably signed an oath to agree being killed if he broke his secrecy oath.
And his family.
So the battle against official state secrecy is a little bit more dangerous and a little bit more pervasive and ingrained than your question implied. No, I didn't bring all these people forward, and you know what? I don't tap dance out on the San Diego freeway when I'm in Los Angeles.
But you did bring.
I answered your question.
But you did bring 8 people forward that did corroborate, that were in the programs with you that did corroborate it. William Whitecrow, Brett Stillings.
William Whitecrow and William Stillings and Bernard Mendez, Ken Johnson Jr., and we got no denial from Obama and Dugan. And then when I wrote the letter to President Obama, dated July 28, 2020, he changed his position from ridicule and denial to admitting publicly that there was a secret space program, but he couldn't talk about it. So please cut me some slack and give me the props I've earned for causing President Barack Obama, what was he, our 44th president for 8 years, who was one of our fellow Mars astronauts, to finally stop lying and admit there was a secret space program. With all the people in the SSP who supposed to have nice things to say about me, maybe they could give me a call and say, thanks, Andy. Thanks for having President Obama affirm that there is a secret space program. Thanks for encouraging General Haim Eshed of Israel to come forward and admit that there are American astronauts on Mars, which he did on December 9th of 2020. 5 months, or a little bit less than 5 months after I wrote to President Obama. This is all connected. These are servants of the permanent secret government. That's the one you should be asking that question of. Why don't you write President Obama and say, sir, you were President of the United States for 4 years, 2009 to 2017, right, in real time, after being elected from the 2008 to 2016 terms.
8 years, yeah. And 8 years, yeah.
Right, 8 years, rather. I don't know what I said. 8 years is what I meant.
Okay.
Sir, why don't you come forward and admit that you went into to Mars or a Mars-like planet or planetoid via a revolutionary interdimensional device with individuals like Andrew D. Basiago and William B. Stillings and Bernard Mendez and William Whitecrow and Ken Johnston Sr. Don't you owe that to the American people, sir? But why am I being asked this question after 20 years of whistleblowing? Please explain that to me. If I had stood on my head and spit nickels for 20 years, would you be asking me, Andy, how come you never stand on your head and spit nickels? I mean, come on. Sir, whoever asked that, that is an unfair and an inapposite and completely ridiculous question. Please ask that of the cover-up artists, not the truth tellers. My God.
Yeah. Brake Davis.
Ellie, lame sabachthani. They don't know what they're doing, Lord.
Brake Davis responds and says, Andy, I'm sorry if that was offensive. I didn't mean it that way. I should have been more specific. You are coming out, so it stands to reason other people alive would too, to help lighten your load.
I brought them forward. Brought them forward.
Yeah.
I've named about 25 people in Project Pegasus.
Yeah.
I spoke to Basiago, Hunt, Agnew, Colgate, Wary, and other knowledgeable parties.
Right.
I then brought forward 4 of my fellow astronauts in that interdimensional probe that may have been getting us to Mars. We were calling it Project Mars. It may have just been another interdimensional box, just like that box featured that science fiction fantasy Blade by Richard Lord, which just happened to be put on the shelf in one of my brother's bedrooms when I was like in the 8th grade, a couple of years before I went into such a program, where I was going to Mars or that Mars-like place, not by a teleporter, not by plasma confinement, but in a box-like elevator, just like Blade does in that series. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
But what we have to get out of is this obligatory skepticism that is causing a form of vilification to be directed at the truth tellers. I have come forward. I have told the truth.
Yeah.
I have brought forward fellow experiencers. Why am I being asked that?
You've done more than anybody else as far as bringing people forward that I can tell. And I've been studying this stuff for a long time. So your story is so full of facts and people and witnesses. It's just remarkable. Some people that ask questions might just not know all of the things that you've revealed.
Aaron, along the way on the conference circuit, I was even getting disclosures from the former wives of exo-hoaxers like Randy Kramer and Alex Collier. And out of mere respect to the truth, even though their specific claims would sometimes have something to do with me, like Randy Kramer, but their general claims really nothing to do with my work, like Alex Collier, to honor the truth and the brave Americans who came forward and told the truth about former husbands, wives, friends, colleagues, and so forth, that they knew were not telling the truth. I vitiated the quality of my truth campaign about my experiences by doing things like talking about the exo-hoaxers. And what happened? Because Alex Collier was on Coast to Coast in the 90s, people still believe him. But I've given people his real name, and nobody has even asked him. Nobody in the truth movement on the exo-political community has said, Alex, what is your birth name?
Yeah.
Where were you born? Isn't it true that according to your ex-wife, Liberty, your real name is Ralph Angerman? And did you spend time in federal prison? In other words, even if you bring up the truth of the fact that, for example, that Zecharia Sitchin was a science fiction writer for Israel who settled in New York and made up the information about the Anunnaki, that he didn't read Sumerian, he didn't have any Sumerian tablets, and when the Sumerian scholar Michael Heisler investigated Sitchin, found he had invented a very credible form of science fiction. He was a brilliant science fiction writer, a creative writer. And there are brilliant anthropology PhDs like Sasha Lessin who have written multiple books about the Anunnaki based on Sitchin's science fiction.
Yeah.
So as I said in the last week's show, the truth is not neutral. It is not a zero-sum game. This kind of lying that's been going on, this exo-hoaxing, has even deceived scholars in different fields who should be spending their time, their valuable brilliance and education as PhDs in different fields, writing about things that matter, not creative writing, not science fiction stories or matters. And that's why I find it so ridiculous when Cliff High said, Andy must be delusional. Science fiction, time travel doesn't exist. And I said, well, you know that time travel doesn't exist? Do white crows not exist? Well, isn't it true that if you see one white crow, you know that white crows exist? That's why William Whitecrow took that name as a shaman. So my point is, how could Cliff High, who I have about last night, I didn't know I'd be talking about him today, how could he say Andy must be delusional? Time travel doesn't exist. Time travel can't exist. When I've described the specific, distinguished American physicists and engineers and mathematicians, from Harold Agnew to Stan Ulam at Atlanta, at the Los Alamos National Labs, to Sterling Colgate, to Edward Teller, that I worked with them, and my dad worked with them. I even told them what devices they were working on, and what they knew, and what they were doing, and what I knew about the provenance, the structure, and the function of those devices, which was Tesla's teleporter, which was Ernetti and Gemelli's chronovisor, which was Sterling Colgate's plasma confinement chamber. And Cliff High says, well, he must be lying because time travel doesn't exist. That's like saying if you close your eyes, you won't be in a car accident. Come on, Cliff High. Get with the truth. Get with reality. So, that's what I have to say about that form of obligatory skepticism. It even involves the oxymoronic, insane delusion of a rather intelligent individual like Cliff High who says, Andy must be delusional because time travel doesn't exist. So Cliff, can you please tell us what qualifies you to say that time travel doesn't exist?
Yes.
If I go to New York City and find a silver dollar on a certain street corner, can you sit in Los Angeles, Cliff, and close your eyes and say, Andy isn't finding a silver dollar on that street in Manhattan in New York City? Because I know it's not there. Come on, Cliff, that's a ridiculous premise.
Right.
That you can state that time travel doesn't exist. I've already described how I was working with the Manhattan Project physicists. And I even said that on the Huffington Post Live with none other than Professor Ronald Mallett of University of Connecticut and Storrs. And what was the brilliant Ron Mallett doing? Rolling a fantasist, and I was somehow violating the rules of physics by saying that DARPA had already achieved time travel. Well, Ron Mallett, are you saying that the Manhattan Project physicists who developed the atomic bomb and the hydrogen bombs under Teller couldn't develop time travel? Didn't the information of Nikola Tesla wasn't seized by our government after Tesla died on January 7th of 43? Didn't the work of Walter Russell already exist? Didn't the ideas of T. Thompson Brown already exist before Project Pegasus was even launched in the mid-60s?
Mm-hmm.
Didn't my dad qualify to work on Pegasus when he was a Lehigh-educated BS in electrical engineering? He was qualified in chemical. He was a brilliant mathematician that spent 8 years at Thomas Edison Research Labs in West Orange, New Jersey. Occupying a desk 2 desks away from the brilliant quantum physicist J.B. Johnson, who discovered white noise in 1928. And my dad was working next to J.B. Johnson from 1956 to 64 at the Edison Labs in West Orange, New Jersey. And he was also working with Foster Nix, the brilliant solid-state physicist or engineer, and had worked for Ralph M. Parsons, C.F. Braun, Curtis Wright, and the Edison Labs. And you're saying my dad didn't qualify when he was elected into Eta Kappa Nu, the National Engineering Honor Society, upon taking his BS in electrical engineering at Lehigh, the world's leading electrical engineering program, in class of 51, and they wouldn't use somebody like my dad on time travel? Are you crazy? Who were they going to use? You know, somebody's father who was in the circus, somebody's dad who was a brave firefighter. I mean, come on. My dad was totally qualified to work on time travel, and he did.
Yeah.
And you're saying that I'm delusional? Please.
Right. Jan is in the chat, and he says, truth is, all that is, was, and will be already exists simultaneously. Otherwise, time travel would not be possible.
Correct.
That's a good point.
In the time-space continuum, it does. But where it doesn't exist is in our point of reference with our cerebral visual cortex, you know, our thoughts and our perception. It's not right in front of our faces, but it's there.
Mm-hmm. One more.
So in other words,
one more quick question. We're a little after 10 minutes after 2 hours, so we're gonna maybe wrap it up here. The question is from T200. Andy, did your dad fully understand the assignments you were sent on as a child, and did he explain them and reassure you?
Not completely. I mean, he was only at some of the probe. Okay. When he was, like when I went to Gettysburg, he took out a map of sort of the street plan of modern Gettysburg with just the original main streets like Baltimore and Washington and Emmitsburg Pike written down. And he showed around where I was going to be put down in the farmland north of Gettysburg and how I should walk down Washington and then make that left at Emmitsburg up to the millinery shop of David Kendall Hart and Eliza Ann Bowen. And it was undoubtedly Eliza Ann Bowen who was talking to John Lawrence Burns about the jacket, the shoes, the hat, and so forth that he was giving me to outfit my Union Bugle Boy costume, because they were the Kendall Harts, Kendall Hart and Bowen were the station chiefs of the Underground Railroad in Gettysburg. And so what Eliza Ann Bowen was probably saying to John Lawrence Burns when I was having that time-space distortion, everything was speeding up and slowing down, and I couldn't see what they were sort of voraciously discussing, what they were heatedly arguing about. Wow. She was probably saying something like, John, I don't want you to give that clothing to any wayfaring Union bugle boy from the war who just wanders into town, because those are for our fugitive slaves. And I got really choked up talking about that.
Yeah.
Because it was a noble thing to try to free the slaves. Yeah. It cost Lincoln his life and the lives of 400,000 Caucasian men from the North and many brave black soldiers as well.
Yeah.
Look at the great song, Give Us a Flag, that Richie Havens sang so well. I urge everybody to listen to that on YouTube. It's really inspiring.
Okay.
About the black slaves who joined the Union cause. Really quite a phenomenal part of American history that's sort of in memory hold.
Oh, yeah.
Just like the career of Marcus Garvey, which I've actually studied. Garvey was a very interesting and colorful period of American history. It's quite an amazing movement, the United Negro Improvement Association, and culturally the so-called Harlem Renaissance. It was really a phenomenal period for Black Americans in this country. It was a really brilliant movement and cultural and political series of events and phenomena. It's really quite amazing. So they kind of covered up the service of the black soldiers. They've also kind of not really told us who some of the white heroes of the Underground Railroad were. But I met one of them, Eliza Ann Bowen. She and her husband, David Kendall Hart, who was an attorney, town council president, and cobbler in that very shop, the maker of shoes in that very shop where John Lawrence Burns was he was a cobbler. Kendall Hart was a shoemaker. She was actually protesting the fact that Burns was giving me some of the clothing, like the shoes, intended for the fugitive slaves, because they were the station chief of the Underground Railroad, the Gettysburg station of the Underground Railroad, to get the slaves farther and farther north. Just like they'd cover up the fact that, I think about it, Do you know who the father-in-law of Mark Twain, author of Huckleberry Finn, the critical scene of which Ernest Hemingway said in his Nobel Prize address, his Nobel Prize for Literature address, began American literature? When Huck Finn decided to take his slave friend Jim north of the Ohio or south on the Mississippi and back into slavery, and Ernest Hemingway said that began American literature.
Wow.
Do you know who the father-in-law of Mark Twain was?
No.
Jervis Langdon, the patron and tutor, and financial patron of the speaking career of Frederick Douglass, that brilliant and phenomenal American who was a fugitive slave from the South, who learned how to read, write, be a great orator, one of the greatest orators in the history of America. And his patron, his white American friend and patron from Palmyra, New York, the father of Twain's future wife, Olivia Langdon, was Jervis Langdon, the patron of Frederick Douglass. And when did any of us, upon reading The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn in junior high, high school, college, even elementary school, when did any educator in America say, and children, I'd like you to know that the father-in-law of Mark Twain, of Samuel Langhorne Clemens, the father of his wife, Olivia Langdon, was Jervis Langdon. And guess who he was? The patron, the financier, the tutor of the great Frederick Douglass, one of the greatest Black Americans in history.
Wow.
Was Jervis Langdon.
Wow.
Mark Twain's father-in-law.
Interesting.
That's another aspect of the Native American, the Black American, those Americans who have served in Defense Project. Those subjects have all been memory hold. I've been trying to bring about true history, and it applies to many different groups in this country.
Yes. Wow.
For those who have become anti-Semite, do they know that one of our most distinguished writers, Mark Twain, sang the praises of the Jewish people for their intelligence and their tenacity in surviving as a group after centuries of prejudice and genocide? Mark Twain, the son-in-law of Frederick Douglass's patron, had some very interesting things to say about Jewish Americans. Have they ever been in Reader's Digest? Have they ever been on the evening news? Have they ever been quoted on the floor of the Senate by an American senator? Even a Jewish American senator like, I don't know, Carl Stern? No. Or Joe Lieberman? No. They weren't even quoted by Lieberman when he ran as Gore's vice presidential candidate. So what I'm saying is, even members of specific groups, in order to reach the political and financial and social oligarchy ruling America, has memory hold certain aspects of our history. Regarding all of these outgroups, Black Americans, Native Americans, Jewish Americans, Polish Americans, everybody thinks of stupid Polacks. Is anybody ever told that in the 13th and 14th centuries, Poland was the leading intellectual capital of Europe? Has anybody ever been told that almost all Nobel Prizes in science have been won by Polish Catholics and Polish Jews? They have been, but we still hear this anti-Semitic claptrap, this anti-Polish claptrap. And why was nobody upset or in arms when I was revealing the fact in my 100 proposals that the Native Americans are still prisoners of war in America?
Wow.
That they were shooting rubber bullets at the Standing Rock protesters when all they were doing, and what they were doing admirably and well, was saving an aquifer, serving fresh drinking water, spring water, to 19 million Americans.
Wow.
When there are only 9 million Native Americans left. 100% Native American individuals left in this land. And nobody made a peep. They're prisoners of war. Oh, that's why they were shooting rubber bullets as your friend Chase Iron Eyes and those other brave men and women from like the Lakota Sioux reservation fighting for that aquifer, they were shooting rubber bullets at them?
Terrible.
Does that mean any of us can do peaceful protests and not be attacked by the deep state? Not until we allow these truths not to go spoken. Not until we don't all understand true history, and that they didn't even tell us the actual accomplishments and service to humanity of Mark Twain's father-in-law. Mark Twain, that one that we were inculcated in K through 12, that they were making documentaries about. But God forbid they should reveal that he might have been inspired to write about that famous decision that Hunt made that really begins American literature, according to Hemingway, of going up the Ohio rather than down the Mississippi.
Right.
In other words, bringing his slave friend Jim to freedom rather than returning him to slavery.
Right.
And no, but we don't want to know that the Twain family, his extended family through his wife, was a patron of Frederick Douglass. God forbid. See, we've been lied to. I learned this at UCLA. You know, people called into this show when we first started doing it to saying that Andy was indoctrinated, so well educated. No, Andy was not being indoctrinated, for example, when he was studying history at UCLA. He was interviewing his history professors for the LA Reader and asking difficult questions. Okay?
Yeah.
He was being published in flight magazines all over America. He was doing interviews for the LA Herald Examiner, the second biggest daily in LA, while writing every day for the Daily Bruin, the third largest circulation daily in Los Angeles County.
Yeah.
So it's not fair to make these blanket allegations about people. Before you know something, you have to know what you're talking about. You have to do the work to learn true history or to learn the truth about another. That has completely broken down in the blogosphere promoted by the internet. And now we learn from Randy Morgan that the purpose of the web was always the pipeline of the dark web.
Wow.
That's in fact, sadly, what it was intended for.
That's really sad. Well, we're going to take it over and make it for good. Get all this crap off of.
Well, let's just start focusing on what matters, and let's start focusing on the good, and engage ourselves and others in forwarding activity, in beneficent activity that helps all human beings.
Right.
And I do believe that wrongs that have been committed against certain ethnic groups need to be righted, and they're not being.
Right. Well,
I want to see the Native Americans given about $100 billion to have a Native Americans profits tax of like a 1% share of all water, uranium, timber, and every other natural taking in America. Why? Because this is the land of the Native American. Yeah. And their numbers have been winnowed down to 9 million of full blood and about twice as many of 50% Native American blood, even 3 times as many. And I think it is a sacrilege first to take the land of the North of the Native American, and then to keep them permanently prisoners of war. What are we being led by? The U.S. Army? I'm afraid that we are, except we're being led by hypocrisy, the state, if you will, and that's a manifestation of the police state. So when I was running, I was talking about all the violations of use of force by state and local police. And the person who won, Mr. Trump, was singing the praises of the police and the militarization of the police. I'm still concerned about the militarization.
I don't think
hope that someday when I get a traffic ticket, a parking ticket, the meter maid doesn't have an AR-15. But if current trends continue, that will be the America we will be living in.
Well, yeah, 87,000 IRS agents with guns is going to be something too that's happening.
Why has nothing been done about the 100 Columbines that we've had since Columbine? Why is it not being shared with American people in the evening news that 100,000 American and even 100,000 German children are disappearing every year?
Yes, that's.
Why are they? Because they are being eaten by cannibals living amongst us.
Yes. Yes.
We're not being told the truth. And it is even stealing our kith and kin. It is taking our children.
Horrifying.
That has to end.
It's horrifying.
We have to make that end.
Yes.
Okay?
Yes.
And it begins with the truth. So let's get rid of the obligatory skepticism.
Yes. Yes, let's get rid of the obligatory.
I didn't believe Kathy O'Brien. I didn't disbelieve Kathy O'Brien when she said she'd been molested by adults when she was young, or even some government officials, because obviously some have been pedophiles. In fact, my understanding is that the current vice president for the Democrats, Kamala Harris, was the only local prosecutor who refused to prosecute Catholic priests for molestation, for pedophilia.
Yeah.
And yet that's never been shared with the American people. Why are they also not sharing with the American people that we are losing or missing, 100,000 children in this country go missing every year?
I know. Yeah.
Why, when he was doing the Missing 411 series, did the University of San Francisco educated criminologist David Pauline not give us any explanation? I mean, I did a major show with Gary Anderson on Night Dreams Talk Radio, where I was positing different theories for Pauline's clear finding of a pattern of missing persons in our national parks, forests, and BLM land. Why did that criminologist with 2 degrees from a distinguished criminology program in San Francisco, one of our biggest cities, the second biggest city or third biggest city in California, not give us any theories of where these people are going missing? Where are all these holes in what we're being told? Not good.
Right. And that's what we're up against. We're up against lies, and we have the sword of truth that we're slicing through. And and it's always, I always learn something from you, Andy, about history and about your awesome experiences, kind of scary experiences sometimes. And I have to thank you for doing this show tonight to answer some of these questions that people have had. And just, you're a true...
I'm sorry if I sound a little bit miffed or, a little bit arrogant or reactive to some of the questions. But look, I'm still kind of disappointed that everybody's practicing sort of obligatory skepticism and then still asking me whether I proved my claims.
Mm-hmm.
I have proved my claims every which way from Sunday,
right? And
I've even brought forward fellow experiencers.
Mm-hmm.
So why don't we ask questions of prominent members of the cover-ups?
Yeah. That's
where the pressure has to go.
Right. Good point.
If you're studying injuries in football games, you don't go to the uninjured quarterback and say, well, how did you wound your arm or leg? You go to the halfback who's just gotten a broken or twisted leg, right?
Mm-hmm.
You study injuries. You don't study wellness to study sports injuries. So why are we going to the truth tellers and saying, even when we've proved our claims or brought forward fellow experiencers,
mm-hmm.
have you ever proved your claims? Or have you ever gotten others who you were in this with to come forward? Of course I have.
Yeah.
It's for example, President of the United States Barack Obama, who has never come forward and said, yes, I was in this interdimensional travel program that Basiago and others have been talking about. That's all he had to do.
Mm-hmm.
And then he could have said, and I can't talk about it because it was secret. He could have even said, I'm not even sure exactly what it was and where we were going. I mean, that's my official position to this day. And I've studied Mars, and I've interviewed my fellow quote unquote Mars astronauts and those who are also in the ARC, the interdimensional device that was used to send us to what they thought was a red planet or a planet somewhere in time-space quite like Mars. And I've even collected some data points that maybe we can talk on a certain show as to why the Mars that we were going to was different than the Mars that we proved with the anomaly data. But maybe that's a whole grist for another episode of The Quest for Truth. But there still is this strange sort of inversion of interrogatory science, the art of questioning, by doing it of the truth tellers, when in fact those questions should be done of the dissemblers and the truth concealers. Like, President Obama, why have you not come forward as you promised to do and tell the truth about the Mars program?
Right.
You told Bernard Mendez and Andrew Basiago through an intermediary that they spoke with during your first term that you would do so when you left the White House. Why, sir, have you not done so? That's never been done. I've given hundreds of interviews on radio and a good dozen on broadcast, network television. And none of those programs have done so. None of the leaders of exopolitics have done so. None of the radio broadcasters who heard my interviews have done so. America is sort of asleep at the switch. Okay?
Yeah.
They remind me of an old man who can't remember which cereal they're eating. We have kind of fallen asleep as a country.
Yes. Yes.
No, I'm not Italian American because my name sounds like Asiago cheese. Because my name is not Basiago. When radio broadcasters have said that, I said, well, first as a matter of professional courtesy, just as a matter of professional courtesy, my name is a Polish surname pronounced Basiago. Okay? Now, why am I still called that even when I'm interviewed by the same individual? There's a kind of a cognitive deficit in America.
Yeah. Yeah,
we've had discussions recently with a leading phone company who actually admitted that the glitches on our phone could not be produced or explained by them, the creator and maintainer of their telephone platform.
Wow.
We are living in America where Verizon and T-Mobile and Sprint and MCI and whatever have been hacked to the point where even the phone platforms cannot know what has been done. And they're admitting it. Okay?
Right.
So America needs to wake up and know that it is already under attack.
Yes. Yes. Well,
so let's start with the truth. And like I said, my choice for our new national anthem would be Get Together by the Youngbloods. Maybe listen to that tonight on YouTube. That is a great song that reminds everybody that they are sisters and brothers. They are children of God, the Almighty, the Supreme Being that created everything. Some have turned to evil. That doesn't mean you have to be brotherly and sisterly toward evil, but towards the good of every group, of every color and creed and nationality, of course. Scripture says that the Lord is no respecter of person. He doesn't care whether you're a Japanese, a Jew, or a Jain, okay? Okay. He doesn't care whether you're from Arizona or Azerbaijan. Should he? Why? It's a big planet, a beautiful planet. Let's save it. Okay?
yes.
But what happened when the presidential candidate who wanted to save the earth, who wanted to make the rescue of the environment the central organizing principle of civilization, won the U.S. presidency? His name was Albert Arnold Gore Jr. They took away his election, and then he conceded. Okay? So my environmental career was washed into the drain when that happened.
Wow.
I had 4 advanced degrees in environmental affairs. Law, planning, land economy, city and regional planning, environmental writing, environmental journalism, writing for the Cousteau Society. Was there any work in environmental protection after Gore had the presidency taken away from him? No. I went back to my legal practice and just abandoned working on environmentalism. And Bush's White House, when they had that representative of the Bush White House meet with me at the Wolf Creek Pass Ski Lodge in southwest Colorado in June when there were no skiers there.
Mm-hmm.
He comes in on this Audi, and I thought, oh, great, he's going to shoot me, and I'm going to be Vince Foster here. I'm going to be suicided, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he says, after saying that he knew everything about me, he said, Andy, we really can't figure you out. If you had continued on the path you were on, you would have become the leading environmental lawyer, professor of your generation. What happened? And I didn't even have the presence of mind that I was going to kill me to say, after Al Gore, the vice president, was denied the presidency because he was a leading environmentalist, you're asking me, somebody, about 13 years younger than President Gore, why I abandoned my environmental career? You're using it to prevent people from getting in office just because they want to include the environment in what's called Marshalling economics and, include it with things like monetary capital and natural resources and consumption and production. Oh, and let's get those plants, trees, and creatures and water and air in there as well. I'm now studying the life of a leading environmental lawyer who died before reaching age 60, who I think, like singer John Denver, may have been assassinated because he was an environmental leader. So maybe at some point we can do a show about that investigation for the quest for truth.
Okay.
But my investigation of the politics of assassination per se and character assassination against American environmentalists is well advanced at this point. I think we're going to be forced to conclude that there has been a war against the environmental movement, a deprivation of federal jobs, a prevention of Al Gore from reaching the presidency, such as he deserved and was highly qualified for, with 8 years of the House, the Senate, and the Vice Presidency, respectively, and a brilliant book, Earth in the Balance, and also other prominent American environmentalists, particularly environmental lawyers. I'm studying one right now who died at age 59 of, at least so far, unexplained causes. And this was a leading American environmental lawyer. He kind of occupied an entire specialty within environmental protection, a given area of the natural resource space. So I'll talk about that at some point.
Okay.
And describe what I think is going on. But the bottom line is that we have to realize that we are already in a war.
Oh, yeah.
We have to start listing these stories of attacks upon food production,
Oh, yeah.
fuel,
Yes.
energy, health.
Oh, yeah. Yep. And we'll have to do that. That's definitely a doable thing. Well, Andy, I'm not sure how much longer this machine's going to keep going. Maybe we should say goodnight while we still can. What do you think?
Sure, that would be a good idea.
Okay. Well, thank you again, Andy. This has been awesome. You're a great truth hero, and thank you for everything you're doing. You're really getting out there now. So people, what's coming up for you in the near future? And you're going to be on, quite frankly, on the 10th.
Yeah, I'm going to do Quite Frankly with Frank on September 10th.
Mm-hmm.
I'm doing Penny Bradley's show on October 17th, I believe, or somewhere thereabouts. I'm doing another episode of Night Dream Talk Radio with Night Dreams, plural, Talk Radio with Gary Anderson on, I believe, on October 11th. I'm doing another discussion with Dr. Michael Salla on his podcast on YouTube on September 29th. And I think Dr. Salla is an important figure.
Mm-hmm.
I think his accomplishments in exopolitics are significant.
Mm-hmm.
15 very important books and 1,000 articles. And I think he is not only a truth-oriented individual, but I think he knows more than he can even reveal.
Wow.
He shared a lot with me, but there's more, I think, there. I'm always doing a show with Michael every month, his podcast. And then I am doing Journey to Truth with Tyler and Aaron.
Awesome.
On November 1st, I believe.
Awesome.
So I'm doing like large format radio shows. Certainly Gary Anderson and his radio show and Michael Sala's podcast are very widely enjoyed.
Mm-hmm.
But also the podcast of leading younger Americans who I'm convinced are very perceptive and aware. I'm sort of identifying the podcasts of younger members of the truth community, the truth movement, who are awake and aware. I think we all agree that podcasts are proliferating. So
Yeah.
I'm being kind of selective. I probably will do Red Pill 78 at one point.
Awesome.
And, I'm doing Journey to Truth
Mm-hmm.
and so forth. So
You're rocking it.
I've enjoyed tonight's show, and I appreciate such feedback. And I just wanted to make it known that I think that it's no longer really relevant or fair to either suggest I haven't proved my claims or brought others forward. That's precisely what I have done.
Exactly.
I've even provided photographic evidence that when I left Gettysburg in November 1963, what I said had happened when the guy was taking the picture of me and everybody there was happening because my eye socket and my cheekbone were visible in the photograph. That was not a known set of Civil War photo defects like blurring by walking when the picture was being exposed, when the film was being exposed. It is an unknown photographic anomaly from the Civil War period. So that's water under the bridge. That stuff has been established now for at least 10 years, if not more. Actually began around 2010.
Okay.
And, I've identified certain fractals that obtain in true history. So that I think that the Stanislav Grof's conception of the self-organizing universe, that everything is being sort of produced by a matrix and directed right at us, at our spirit in this lifetime, in our concatenation of multiple lives, is closer to reality than the causal principle of Arthur Koestler in his book, The Roots of Coincidence. In other words, when you're sitting at your desk and you think of somebody from 20 years ago and they walk past your window that you're looking through at your desk,
Mm-hmm.
the Stanislav Grof position is that event was being telemediated to your cerebrum, to your mind,
Wow.
in your brain.
Wow.
And therefore, because you were destined to see it and it was being sent to you already, you had a precognitive flash of it, and that made you think of the person. And the mere fact that the person is appearing before you at all versus anything else, in the universe, another person, a plane, train, automobile, or whatever, a bird, is meaningful. It's actually a meaningful event because it's happening for some reason. Like one day I had a dream of Paul McCready, the solar aviator. I went to my office and read my interview with Paul McCready. I went to the LA Times and took a copy of the LA Times and threw it on our hassock, and it opened up to an interview with Paul McCready or an article about Paul McCready.
Mm-hmm.
And then I did some research for the writer Greg Kreitzer at Cal State Northridge, and I dropped an edition of the Smithsonian on a stack of bound volumes of magazine, and it opened to, guess what? A story about Paul McCready.
Uh-huh.
That was the multiverse, for some reason, reminding me of Paul McCready in my earlier interview of Paul McCready for the LA Reader. Maybe I was being told by the multiverse, or by the Supreme Being, or by the angels and saints in heaven, the host of heaven. Andy, focus on Paul McCready for a while, because we want to see his solar aviation and solar airplane become the norm, because the the fuel-based airplanes are destroying your planet with carbon pollution. And that's happened again and again. So I've documented fractals from both this life and past lives relative to this life. So do not believe anything but that coincidences happen for a reason. They happen for a reason because we're living in a self-organized universe, as described by Stanislav Grof, not the causal principle of Paul McCready. I believe McCready was simply mistaken. He was a brilliant writer of like Darkness at Noon and other works, The Roots of Coincidence. But in trying to frame the roots of coincidence, I believe Kessler's idea of the causal principle is an oxymoron. It's a self-contradictory phrase, like a hot cold. I can eat ice cream, but we can't eat hot ice cream and have it hot on our tongue because it melts at a certain temperature. So there is no hot cold or cold hot. So there's no causal principle.
Okay.
So just remember that everything that happens in your life is for a purpose, large or small. Nothing is accidental.
Awesome.
What do we learn when we become semi-disabled? Well, a number of fruits of the spirit that I've been forced to learn, disabled with my visual and renal cortexes, or cortices, or whatever it is patience, perseverance, courage, hope, charity, forgiveness, and other virtues. So everything that happens to us develops us spiritually.
Yes.
Perhaps that's what Scripture means when it says the Lord works in mysterious ways.
Oh, yeah.
That's maybe why bad things happen to good people. Because everything that is experienced is learning. It is an invitation, an opportunity for spiritual development, spiritual growth. And that fundamentally is what we are. We are spirit.
Yes, we are. Yes,
we are a symphony of souls, a symphony of spirit. Let's just make those orchestration symphonic. It takes many voices to create harmony. Let's make that symphony of spirits harmonious.
Beautiful.
That's key. When we do that, we'll succeed in the universe, and life aboard this planet will be very magical. The permanent secret government is obviously holding back very advanced medical technologies.
Yes.
And that is a major aspect of the deep state that I want to help lead the fight against.
Awesome.
The bionic revolution. They are holding stuff back. I've already had it confirmed. I don't want to be specific in specifically what they're holding back, but they are holding back specific life-advantaging medical technologies.
Terrible.
Probably to save the allopathic medical community.
Wow.
And all of its wealth. In other words, the AMA is supporting second-rate medical technology, medical science. I never allowed that to happen here in Washington practicing law. I'm inactive now, and I sort of have to be. But I never did that. I never said, "Oh, I'm going to give this client half defense, half representation." But I'm sorry to say that that's what the allopathic medical community has become in America.
Yeah.
The HMOs especially. So we have to find out what we have, where it is, and demand that it be released to advantage everyone.
Yes.
That's why I love the great Bruce Springsteen. Remember what Bruce said? I remember it clearly at one of his concerts. Either everybody makes it or nobody does.
Yeah.
That is the truth. And perhaps with that quotable quote by the great Bruce Joseph Frederick Springsteen, we can end tonight's show.
Good night, Andy. Thank you.
Good night, Aaron. Thank you. God bless. Bye-bye.
God bless.